Some of your regular ABC daytime programs will not be seen today, but return tomorrow at their regular times.
4 years ago at the U.S. Capitol, it was sunny, as warm an inaugural day as there has ever been. Ronald Reagan was sworn in for his first term, the 40th President of the United States. Today, it is more like January at the western front of the Capitol, along the parade route, at the stands in front of the White House. The bunting is draped, all the chairs are in place. They will not be used, for this is the coldest inaugural day there has ever been.
This is an ABC News special. Inauguration 85. The beginning of Ronald Reagan's second term as President of the United States. Reporting from ABC News headquarters in Washington, David Brinkley and Peter Jennings.
Good morning and welcome to our coverage of President Reagan's second inaugural. By now, I think many of you around the country must think that those of us who've been reporting from Washington in the last 24 hours imagine ourselves as weather forecasters. Yes, it is bitterly cold here, and David, it has been badly disrupted.
It has indeed. We will still see Mr. Reagan take his oath, and he will still make his inaugural speech, but there will be no parade. Because at 15 or 20 below, the valves freeze on a trumpet, the slide freezes on a trombone, and not even Benny Goodman can play a clarinet with mittens on. So about all you can play in this kind of weather is a drum and a glockenspiel, which is not very exciting music.
Here's what it looks like outside the west side of the Capitol, looking at all of those empty chairs. 140,000 people were actually invited, and about 1 in 14,000 are now going to join this public ceremony, because the inauguration is, of course, going to proceed inside the rotunda of the Capitol, this great masterpiece of the Capitol building itself. And there you see it with the Marine Band inside. Now, we don't, I must confess, at this point, even know how people finally were invited to join this particular ceremony this morning. A lot of people in hotels around the city simply got calls this morning and were told to report to their senator's office. And so we will have to have a look, David, as the day goes on to see who finally made it in.
So 139,000 people will not see the swearing in as they expected. Sam Donaldson is in the rotunda, the Capitol, wandering around talking to people, taking notes. Sam?
Well, David, some of us are here. As you observed, there are only about 1,000 people that can pack into this great rotunda. Members of the House have already gathered. The members of the Senate are coming in right now. And there are a few members of the general public wedged in here or there. You see the podium now from which the president will take the oath for a second time. Yesterday, of course, he took it at the White House. He takes it again here and delivers his inaugural address. He got up this morning a little late. Officials at the White House say that Mrs. Reagan rose about 7:30, which is late for him. And they had breakfast on trays in the family quarter. And then, of course, he's gone to church now. He'll be coming up here in just a very few minutes. He'll be in a holding room for a while. And, of course, precisely at the stroke of noon, he will take the oath of office again from Chief Justice Berger. There you see the Marine Band playing, and when the Marine Band plays here, you can't even hear yourself think. Peter?
Sam, thank you very much. You pointed out what the president's morning has been like. We will have all of the ceremonies this morning, and the president is going to leave the White House shortly. We'll be right back.
Now we're on the north portico of the White House, the side facing Pennsylvania Avenue, with a kind of ugly glassed-in box there to keep the cold out. The Joint Congressional Committee has come to the White House to escort the president to the Capitol to take the oath. He comes now. They've sat inside for a few minutes, had coffee. They will ride up the avenue to the Capitol, where he will take the oath. In closed cars, obviously, not convertibles.
Which they would have done anyway, David, I think, had there been nice weather because of the security factor. Mrs. Reagan there, we're seeing for the first time today coming out of the White House, though she went to church with the president across Lafayette Square this morning wearing that blue. She's made the point of saying that while red is one of her favorite colors, she has worn that blue to reflect how all of the states showed up in blue on election night, on the election maps on the networks, as the Reagan victory was displayed across the country. This today, of course, not only a signal of continuity in the country, but also a victory party for the Republicans as the President and the Joint Congressional Committee for Inaugural Affairs now leaves the White House to drive this 1.5 miles along Pennsylvania Avenue, what would have been the parade route to the Capitol, for the first time ever, a president going to be inaugurated publicly inside the rotunda.
That Cadillac he's in is 21 feet long, like a tugboat.
Even before all of this weather descended on the city, David, and we had some inkling of it yesterday when, during your program, the Vice President and Mr. Reagan came out on the North Portico briefly, and you could see their breath positively standing in the air. There was enormous concern for security, and this great presidential limousine is but the latest acquisition in a city which has been, sadly, very conscious of security, and we may get some sense of that as this 5-car motorcade proceeds along Pennsylvania Avenue past the empty stands, which would at this point have been filled, undoubtedly, had the weather been any better.
One of the pleasures, I would guess, of being President of the United States is that you never sit in a traffic jam and you never stop for a red light.
Well, certainly the rest of us do. Whenever the President comes to New York City, for example, to attend the United Nations or to come to the Waldorf Astoria, which is his favorite hotel to come and make a speech at, the city gets absolutely and totally tied up, and it does here as well.
The streets, as you see, have some resemblance to an ice hockey rink. Weather's terrible. Roger Peterson has been looking into the weather in past inaugurals. Roger, what'd you find out?
Bad inaugural weather is nothing new. They're still talking about the rain at William Henry Harrison's inauguration in 1841. Harrison caught pneumonia and died 31 days later. Until today, Ulysses S. Grant's inaugural in 1869 was the coldest on record, 16 degrees and windy, but no one measured wind chill in those days. At Grant's inaugural ball, guests shivered, champagne froze, and canaries brought in for decorations froze to death. On the morning of his inauguration in 1909, President Taft noted, "I always said it would be a cold day when I got to be president," and it was. There was an icy blizzard that knocked out communications and the railroads. The swearing was moved inside the Capitol, but the parade went as scheduled. It rained on Franklin Roosevelt's parade in 1937, the wettest inaugural on record. But FDR decided if the crowd could brave the elements, so could he, and he insisted in riding on an open car. Cold weather cooled what was supposed to be Camelot in 1961 when John Kennedy was sworn in. Heaters keeping dignitaries warm caught poet Robert Frost's coat on fire briefly. Snow that clogged the city had to be cleared by the Army to make way for the parade. It was another cold day 7 years ago when Jimmy Carter took office, 28 degrees. But the sun was shining and Carter surprised everyone by walking from the Capitol to the White House. And 4 years ago, politics and the weather changed dramatically. President Reagan began his first term on the warmest inaugural day on record, spring in January, 56 degrees. Quite a contrast from today, but this weather may at least put a temporary end to all those reports that Washington produces little except hot air. Gentlemen?
Thank you, Roger. Now here's the presidential motorcade proceeding from the White House to the Capitol up Pennsylvania Avenue. Along the way, they will pass a lot of bleacher seats put up over the last several weeks and tickets to them sold. Now they will not be used. They're all covered with ice. And the people who bought the tickets can turn them in and get a refund.
Yeah, everybody's scrambling around, David, to compensate for this weather. And to be perfectly frank, everybody's flying by the seat of their pants today. We're not even together at this point sure how the day is going to end, though we know there's going to be some kind of we the people or we the fewer people celebration, as President Reagan had hoped. All this talk about the weather, incidentally, is not just a matter of hastily gathered trivia. You look at any book or any history of inaugurals in this country, you'll find there have only been 32 clear ones. They've always had some impact. And by and large, weather has been such a negative factor in inaugurals over our history that it's come to be known as inaugural weather, at least by Washingtonians.
Ronald Walker, who is the chairman of making all these arrangements, he's a sort of Cecil B. DeMille or P.T. Barnum, said this morning, "I wish I could cry." I don't think he did. Roger Peterson is outside at the Capitol.
It really isn't quite as bad as you might think it is out here. The sun's shining brightly. There isn't too much of a breeze, but the temperature is low enough so that after you've been here for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, you start to feel it, and then you keep feeling it more and more and more as you go. As you see, we've got 25,000 empty seats here, and there was room for another 120,000 standees. Nobody has shown up except about 100 people from out of town who said they didn't think it was that cold, and why couldn't they go in and look around? The police officers told them that everything was closed down and going inside, and they could stay out by the Capitol and watch a parade if they'd like, the parade of the president arriving and departing, which is about all they're going to see.
Roger, thanks very much. I want to point out Roger is a devoted skier, and so is, I'm sure, determined not to let us know he's been cold. He's not the only one. One of the more colorful participants in the inaugural parade today were going to be the Huskies and their dog sleds, or the drivers of the dog sleds and their Huskies from Alaska. They are absolutely put out and making no bones about the fact that they think the weather here in Washington is nothing compared to what they are accustomed to.
They find it a little warm.
And even a lot of the students who have come here with many bands from around the country and who are deeply disappointed were hatching plans, some of them I heard this morning, to perhaps just march down Pennsylvania Avenue anyway.
It depends on where they came from.
I suppose that's perfect. It came from Minnesota and Wisconsin. Anywhere in the Midwest, you will not think it is terribly bad. In Alaska today, I might add, it is in the 40s, not as cold as it is here. Presidential motorcade, as we said, 5 cars of them. Essentially, this is the presidential escort, the inaugural committee's escort, led today by Senator Charles Mathias from Maryland, who's the chairman of the committee, Tip O'Neill, who is the Speaker of the House, Representative Jim O'Neill, Robert Dole, who's the majority leader in the Senate, all escorting the president, as is tradition, from the White House up to the law library entrance at the east side of the Capitol, across from the Supreme Court, which has been in session today. President and Mrs. Reagan getting out now and being met by Larry Smith, who is the Sergeant of Arms of the Senate, and Jack Russ, who is the Sergeant of Arms in the House, and Mike Von Fremd is there for us. Mike?
Peter, he's just walking in now. This is what's called the Law Library entrance. The President, with Speaker O'Neill, is going in. The security here has been incredibly tight. As a matter of fact, Mayor Marion Barry, the D.C. mayor, tried to get in that exact same entrance just a few minutes ago, and he was politely told, Mr. Mayor, no thanks, you can't come in here. This is the President's entrance. Perhaps they're still a little upset with the mayor over the weather that he has turned out in Washington this day. And so now he's inside, and we'll go back to you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mike. The President's going to go into a holding room for a few minutes now while the actual inauguration ceremony gets completely established and everybody gets in place, and we'll be right back. On a cold January morning, the Capitol, the west side of the Capitol, the President now inside there in a holding room, while not as many people as would like to have attended wait inside the rotunda itself for this public inauguration in just a few minutes. Wander around Washington today, in and out of hotels and in the side of the stores. You will find, besides women exchanging their mink coats for thermal underwear, a great many disappointed people who had come here from all across the country and in some places from overseas to attend this inauguration. Everybody, however, is trying to put a good face on it, not the least of whom is Senator Mathias, who planned it all.
Well, it's still going to be a very impressive and dignified and important occasion. Through your help on television, millions of people around the world, millions of Americans will see it and participate in it. The program will go forward exactly as we had planned it. It'll just be on a different stage.
Well, except that you had yesterday what was supposed to be a very private ceremony with the public, in effect, invited today. Now all of a sudden the public can't see it either originally or in the replay.
That's the great disappointment, and I'm sure it's a disappointment to the President, and I know it's a disappointment to me and to Mrs. Mathias, who's been very much involved, to members of the committee. But that is one of the lessons of mankind. Man proposes and God disposes.
When it began to appear the outdoor events could not be held because of the weather, something else had to be planned. And in the middle of all of this was Jim Lake, who was press secretary of the Presidential Inaugural Committee. Mr. Lake, tell us about what you all did yesterday and how this decision finally was made.
Well, yesterday morning, David, the President was concerned and for an event that we had scheduled last night at the Jefferson Memorial. He asked the staff to look at the possibility of canceling that, and early yesterday morning the decision was made to cancel that event because of the gusting winds and the wind chill factor being so significantly low. That precipitated decision-making and examination throughout the day of weather conditions, getting medical opinions about what would take place today, and the staff, as we developed our information and got inputs from the various sources, we finally got together around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon at Blair House and came up with a recommendation to the President that was then conveyed to him by Ron Walker, the chairman, and several others, making the recommendation that the parade be canceled and that the recommendation be made to the Joint Congressional Committee.
So, Mr. Lake, excuse me for interrupting, but what are you going to do instead? Everybody's wondering about this We the People celebration this afternoon.
Well, we're all very disappointed about it. The President and all of us at the Inaugural Committee are most disappointed about the young people who have worked so hard and had their hearts broken about this great opportunity they saw to participate in this historic event.
But you are going to do something.
So we are going to have for them out at the Capitol Center a local establishment here that will house all of the parade participants, the military as well as the civilian parade participants, in an event that will include the President and the Vice President and a brief program that will give some an occasion to show their stuff for the President and all to see and hear and visit with the President.
Mr. Lake, I'd like to pass on a request, or at least a query I got last night in one of the hotels. Are people going to get their money back?
Yes. We have put out an announcement early this morning with specific information that people will receive their money back upon request of the Inaugural Committee, submitted by February the 10th, and we will expedite the handling of that as fast as we can.
Sorry to end on a crass note. Thanks, Mr. Lake.
Sure.
Thank you very much. A lot of, particularly young people, came here to march in the parade and play horns and this and that, are disappointed, obviously. Dean Reynolds has been talking to some of them. Dean?
The bands have been practicing for months, from Georgia to California, from Connecticut to Illinois.
Just something that not a lot of people get to do in their lifetime. And after the town's given us so much support and everything, we really don't want to let anybody down.
The floats were stapled into place. The workmen worked their magic into the night on the reviewing stands that go up and come down punctually every 4 years. Everything was taking shape when the thermometer abruptly checked out.
It is serious weather and not to be fooled around with.
And it is cold. Well, I mean, it's going to be tomorrow morning as cold as we've seen in a long time.
Yes, that's Washington, not Wausau. Predicted wind chill factor for parade time, 25 below. Frostbite became a topic of conversation, paving the way for the melancholy presidential decision read by an inaugural official late Sunday.
Nancy and I are disappointed that the weather in Washington caused this change. But the health and safety of those attending and working at these outdoor events must come before any celebrations.
The change, of course, is the cancellation of the parade. It went down hard.
I don't think it's cold at all. It's chilly, but not cold.
A Hawaiian drill team was making the best of things, but their disappointment wasn't quite as keen.
Nice place to visit, but I don't think we could live here. Not for very long.
And a Georgia flag twirler was just plain candid about the cold.
I could still feel my feet, but barely.
But by this morning, the mood had brightened as work proceeded on the somewhat ironic transformation of a nearby hockey rink into the setting for a substitute inaugural extravaganza to be witnessed by the President. Something to write home about, after all. Gentlemen?
There are some who thought it wasn't too cold, but after 2-3 hours out in the cold on Pennsylvania Avenue. Now we are back in the rotunda at the Capitol, where the President shortly will take the oath of office. That's Chief Justice Warren Burger and Mrs. Burger. He will administer the oath.
Mrs. Bush
and
also
Barbara
there
Bush
as well. Give you some idea, David, of the magnitude of the disappointment, just to reflect a little bit on what Dean Reynolds was saying. There were 11,500 participants in this year's inaugural parade, on top of those people who are presently here in the rotunda, and there were 57 bands scheduled to play. We'll hear some of them this afternoon, but that is just how many people have been disappointed by the weather.
Chief Justice will administer the oath. That is custom, but it is not required. Anybody can administer the oath. The captain of a ship licensed to perform marriages could administer the oath.
Anybody who's
the
at least
Justice
qualified?
of the Peace.
Notary Republic, right?
Yeah, Notary Public swore in Calvin Coolidge. It happened to be his father, but he was a Notary Public. Anybody could do it, but it's the Chief Justice.
Looking at the rotunda, this, as I said before, centerpiece of Capitol life, where we, not too many months ago, dwelled and concentrated our attention as the unknown soldier from Vietnam lay in state. We're now waiting for President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan and the Vice President to come and take their public oaths of office, reminding you again, as most of you probably know, the President and Mr. Bush were officially sworn in yesterday at noon, as the Constitution calls for, on the 20th of January. There was a time when inaugurations were held in March, giving legislators and
George Bush,
politicians,
leaders of Congress coming in there
from around the country, a chance to get back to Washington when transportation was not so easy. A great many people, I suspect, wishing it were still done in March.
This rotunda is huge. There have been some very sad scenes in there over the years. The statesmen who have died lay in state there on public file through. Mrs. Reagan.
20 of our national leaders have lain in state there, and we'll be right back after these messages and a word from your local station.
When bathroom soap scum acts tough, get Tough Act. When bathroom water spots act tough, get Tough Act. Tough Act is the heavy-duty bathroom cleaner that foams and cleans without abrasives, no scratching, and no scrubbing. So for heavy-duty cleaning, get Tough Act. Trigger spray or new aerosol. It's a tough act to follow.
Dristan versus Actifed against sinus cold miseries. Both people have sinus congestion and pain.
The pressure is terrible. I'll try Dristan. With pressure, I'll take Actifed.
Both Actifed and Dristan have effective medicines for sinus pressure and sneezing. But Dristan has an extra medicine to relieve sinus pain. Relief Actifed can't give.
I feel better, but my sinuses still hurt.
No congestion, no pressure, no sinus pain. Dristan works.
Dristan, extra medicine for more sinus cold relief.
Tuesday to make ends meet.
Welcome to the home of the Flying Finger.
Jack takes a job as a sushi chef on Three's a Crowd. Then Tony defends Angela's honor.
You said you were too big tramp. You slept your way to the top, then you got nasty.
Who's the Boss? All starting at 8, 7 Central.
Tomorrow, MASH is back.
Oh, yes, I might have known.
Is this true?
It's a bunch of hooey, Colonel. I can't believe it.
What's going on? MASH is back. That's what's going on.
That's what's going on?
It's a pretty neat trick. They won't get away with it.
Sure we will. And we want everyone to know you can catch the wacky 4077 weeknights at 10:30 on Channel 2. Hence, this professional promotional announcement.
Horse hockey.
What do you expect with very little talent and only 5 minutes preparation?
Anything I could add would be of little consequence.
I won't argue with you there, Frank.
You know, for us, there's nothing like hitting the back roads and getting off the beaten path. Channel 2's George Jones knows the feeling. He was born in this part of the country. He appreciates the good times, and he understands your concerns. So when it comes to news, I guess you could say George Jones has got a natural knack for making things easy for you to understand. On Channel 2 News, George Jones, he's involved first for you. Weeknights at 5 and 10 on Nashville's Channel 2. Let's get involved together.
It's nothing short of miraculous. Researchers are finally discovering a way to prevent diabetes in animals. The Juvenile Diabetes Foundation is convinced that a cure for people can't be far behind. A cure. That's why they need your help now more than ever. The Juvenile Diabetes Foundation really can eliminate the nation's third largest killer. But it's not just a matter of time. It's a matter of money.
The Juvenile Diabetes Foundation. There's a cure, and we'll find it.
Dallas, weekdays at 4 on Nashville's Channel 2.
Behind us, the weather notwithstanding, one of the truly great views in this capital, the west face of the Capitol, looking from up the mall, from the direction of the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, and there, the rotunda itself.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
And the President, who has being escorted in by Speaker Tip O'Neill and Senator Mathias from Maryland, who is the chairman of this inauguration committee. Warm applause to begin a ceremony which we are not even absolutely certain will be the same as it would have been outside. Business suits this year as opposed to morning coats 4 years ago.
He's got a red, white, and blue necktie on. Perfectly
President,
appropriate, I would say.
Mr. Vice President, fellow citizens, we celebrate today the 50th inauguration of a President and Vice President of the United States, and the beginning of a presidential term that brings us to the threshold of the 3rd century of American constitutional government. I will ask the Reverend Timothy S. Healy, President of Georgetown University, to offer the invocation.
Let us offer this prayer for the President and Vice President and their families, for the people and government of these United States, for men and women of goodwill everywhere, captive and free, who watch us today. Please join me in saying the words our Lord taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Miss Jessie Norman will now sing Simple Gifts, one of the songs in Aaron Copland's Old American Songs.
Jessie Norman, an extremely well-known and well-thought-of American opera singer who sung all over the world.
Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, we'll be in the valley of love and delights. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be a delight, till by turning we come round right. Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, we'll be in the the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, to be in the valley of love and
This may not have, David, as a formal or telegenic look about it, but it has a rather informal, almost uncertain quality of earlier inaugurations. People just gathered around. It's more of a family quality, I think.
It almost looks like one of those old engravings from Philadelphia of the statesmen gathered to draw up a constitution.
Jesse Norman, who has been one of the great operatic ambassadors for this country. And again, Senator Mathias.
I now ask Rabbi Alfred Gottschalk, president of Hebrew Union College of Cincinnati, to offer a prayer.
We, the people, turn to you, O God, in prayer. We have come again to this place which stirs our hearts to reaffirm the highest ideals of our nation. The sacred oaths about to be pronounced in your name reflect the awesome responsibilities entrusted to our President and Vice President by the American people. May you, who are the Rock of Ages, guide them in protecting the Constitution of our beloved Commonwealth, founded in faith, which ensures unity without uniformity. Sustain them, O God, as they advance the American way, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to malevolence no hope. O source of all life, enshrine in their hearts the knowledge that all are created in your image, and that life, your gift to us, is sacred. Inspire our leaders to defeat hunger and hurt, to promote compassion, and to find successful ways to assure the weak their share of America's promise. In humility we pray that this opportunity for renewal will advance reconciliation in the family of nations, guaranteeing peace in our world and tranquility in the farthest reaches of our universe. May those who follow us, our children and our children's children, bless our President and Vice President, their families and all those associated with them in government, and may all remember this time and this administration as that in which their future was made secure. O God, may you who makes peace in high places help us here on earth to find the way to peace. Blessed are you, O God, Oseh HaShalom, granter of peace. Amen.
Justice Potter Stewart will administer the oath of office to the Vice President.
Justice Stewart, who of course is retired from the Supreme Court and was replaced by Sandra Day O'Connor, President Reagan's nominee. He swore Mr. Bush in 1981. They'll use the same Bible they used then.
Bible given to him by Billy
George
Graham.
Herbert Walker
I, George Herbert Walker Bush,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this oath, this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation.
Without any mental reservation.
Or purpose of evasion.
Or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office.
The duties of the office.
On which I am about to enter.
On which I am about to enter.
So help you God.
So help me God.
We make a great deal of the presidential oath. The vice presidential oath is actually the same one as all members of the cabinet swear when they are sworn into office on behalf of the president. George Bush, 61 years old, the 43rd vice president of the United States.
A lot of politicians have poked fun at the office of vice president. I believe it was Hubert Humphrey who, when he was sworn in, said, "I now join the ranks of Daniel Tompkins, George Dallas, Hannibal Hamlin, and Garrett Hobart."
The University of Maryland Chorus, under the direction of Dr. Paul Traver, will now sing the first section of Randall Thompson's Testament of Freedom.
At the same
chorus, state which Senator Mathias represents, singing Testament of Freedom. Certainly the words will be familiar at least to Jeffersonian scholars because the words are from the writings of President Jefferson.
I will now ask the President's own pastor, the Reverend Don Mumaw of Bel Air Presbyterian Church, to offer a prayer.
You may recognize Reverend Mumaw from 1981.
Let us all unite in prayer. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us. Come, Father, with cleansing power and remove all things from us that would impede your purpose and thwart your plan. Forgive our pride and arrogance before each other and other nations of the world. May we, with godly grace, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who work for a just and free world. Grant us, O Father, the courage and the compassion to stand in solidarity with the poor, the needy, the dispossessed, and the disadvantaged. May the President and Vice President of these United States and all who stand with him in his desire for peace receive first the peace of Christ, and in all things seek first not the kingdom of plenty or the kingdom of political superiority, but may they seek humbly first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. In the name of the King, even Jesus Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen. Amen.
And now we come to the actual swearing in of the President.
Chief Justice will now administer the oath to the President.
Second time in 24 hours, and Chief Justice Warren Burger, fifth time he has administered the oath of office to the President of the United States. This is for the nation and much of the world to participate in a fuller way than yesterday.
Ready to take the oath? You'll raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
And will to the best of my ability.
Will to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, sir.
A mere 35 words, but there are few 35-word phrases as important, set out in Article 2 of the Constitution. And the word "so help me God" is not part of it. Students of history will recall that after his inauguration, it was George Washington who simply added the words "so help me God." They're not called for in the Constitution. And every president, I think but one, David, has added it ever since.
One said affirm for some obscure religious reason. I don't know what it was. Anyway, those 35 words are all the Constitution requires for an inauguration. The rest of it is embellishment that you can add if you like.
Senator Mathias, Chief Justice Burger, Vice President Bush, Speaker O'Neill, Senator Dole, Reverend clergy, and members of my family and friends, and my fellow citizens, this day has been made brighter with the presence here of one who for a time has been absent, Senator John Stennis. God bless you and welcome back. There is, however, one who is not with us today, Representative Gillis Long of Louisiana. left us last night. And I wonder if we could all join in a moment of silent prayer. Amen. There are no words adequate to express my thanks for the great honor that you've bestowed on me. I'll do my utmost to be deserving of your trust. This is, as Senator Mathias told us, the 50th time that we, the people, have celebrated this historic occasion. When the first president, George Washington, placed his hand upon the Bible, he stood less than a single day's journey by horseback from raw, untamed wilderness. There were 4 million Americans in a union of 13 states. Today, we are 60 times as many in a union of 50 states. We've lighted the world with our inventions, gone to the aid of mankind wherever in the world there was a cry for help, journeyed to the moon, and safely returned. So much has changed, and yet we stand together as we did 2 centuries ago. When I took this oath 4 years ago, I did so in a time of economic stress. Voices were raised saying that we had to look to our past for the greatness and glory. But we, the present-day Americans, are not given to looking backward. In this blessed land, there is always a better tomorrow. 4 years ago, I spoke to you of a new beginning, and we have accomplished that. But in another sense, our new beginning is a continuation of that beginning created 2 centuries ago, when, for the first time in history, government, the people said, was not our master, it is our servant. Its only power, that which we, the people, allow it to have. That system has never failed us. But for a time, we failed the system. We asked things of government that government was not equipped to give. We yielded authority to the national government that properly belonged to states or to local governments or to the people themselves. We allowed taxes and inflation to rob us of our earnings and savings and watched the great industrial machine that had made us the most productive people on earth slow down and the number of unemployed increase. By 1980, we knew it was time to renew our faith, to strive with all our strength toward the ultimate in individual freedom consistent with an orderly society. We believed then and now there are no limits to growth and human progress when men and women are free to follow their dreams. And we were right. And we were right to believe that. Tax rates have been reduced, inflation cut dramatically, and more people are employed than ever before in our history. We are creating a nation once again, vibrant, robust, and alive. But there are many mountains yet to climb. We will not rest until every American enjoys the fullness of freedom, dignity, and opportunity as our birthright. It is our birthright as citizens of this great republic. And if we meet this challenge, these will be years when Americans have restored their confidence and tradition of progress, when our values of faith, family, work, and neighborhood were restated for a modern age, when our economy was finally freed from government's grip, when we made sincere efforts at meaningful arms reductions and by rebuilding our defenses, our economy, and developing new technologies, help preserve peace in a troubled world. When America courageously supported the struggle for individual liberty, self-government, and free enterprise throughout the world, and turned the tide of history away from totalitarian darkness and into the warm sunlight of human freedom. My fellow citizens, our nation is poised for greatness. We must do what we know is right and do it with all our might. Let history say of us, these were golden years when the American Revolution was reborn, when freedom gained new life and America reached for her best. Our two-party system has solved us and served us, I should say, well over the years, but never better than in those times of great challenge when we came together not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans united in a common cause. Two of our founding fathers, a Boston lawyer named Adams and a Virginia planter named Jefferson, members of that remarkable group who met in Independence Hall and dared to think they could start the world over again, left us an important lesson. They had become, in the years then in government, bitter political rivals. In the presidential election of 1800, and then years later, when both were retired and age had softened their anger, they began to speak to each other again through letters. A bond was reestablished between those two who had helped create this government of ours. In 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, they both died. They died on the same day, within a few hours of each other, and that day was the 4th of July. In one of those letters exchanged in the sunset of their lives, Jefferson wrote, "It carries me back to the times when, beset with difficulties and dangers, we were fellow laborers in the same cause, struggling for what is most valuable to man, his right of self-government, laboring always at the same oar, with some wave ever ahead threatening to overwhelm us, and yet passing harmless, we rode through the storm with heart and hand." Well, with heart and hand, let us stand as one today. One people under God, determined that our future shall be worthy of our past. As we do, we must not repeat the well-intentioned errors of our past. We must never again abuse the trust of working men and women by sending their earnings on a futile chase after the spiraling demands of a bloated federal establishment. You elected us in 1980 to end this prescription for disaster, and I don't believe you re-elected us in 1984 to reverse course. At the heart of our efforts is one idea vindicated by 25 straight months of economic growth. Freedom and incentives unleash the drive and entrepreneurial genius that are the core of human progress. We have begun to increase the rewards for work, savings, and investment, reduce the increase in the cost and size of government and its interference in people's lives. We must simplify our tax system, make it more fair, and bring the rates down for all who work and earn. We must think anew and move with a new boldness so every American who seeks work can find work, so the least among us shall have an equal chance to achieve the greatest things, to be heroes who heal our sick, feed the hungry, protect peace among nations, and leave this world a better place. The time has come for a new American emancipation, a great national drive to tear down economic barriers and liberate the spirit of enterprise in the most distressed areas of our country. My friends, together we can do this, and do it we must, so help me God. From new freedom will spring new opportunities for growth, a more productive, fulfilled, and united people, and a stronger America. An America that will lead the technological revolution and also open its mind and heart and soul to the treasures of literature, music, and poetry, and the values of faith, courage, and love. A dynamic economy with more citizens working and paying taxes will be our strongest tool to bring down budget deficits. But an almost unbroken 50 years of deficit spending has finally brought us to a time of reckoning. We've come to a turning point, a moment for hard decisions. I have asked the Cabinet and my staff a question, and now I put the same question to all of you. If not us, who? And if not now, when? It must be done by all of us. Going forward with a program aimed at reaching a balanced budget, we can then begin reducing the national debt. I will shortly submit a budget to the Congress aimed at freezing government program spending for the next year. Beyond this, we must take further steps to permanently control government's power to tax and spend. We must act now to protect future generations from government's desire to spend its citizens' money and tax them into servitude when the bills come due. Let us make it unconstitutional for the federal government to spend more than the federal government takes in. We have already started returning to the people and to state and local governments responsibilities better handled by them. Now, there is a place for the federal government in matters of social compassion, but our fundamental goals must be to reduce dependency and upgrade the dignity of those who are infirm or disadvantaged. And here, a growing economy and support from family and community offer our best chance for a society where compassion is a way of life, where the old and infirm are cared for, the young and, yes, the unborn protected, and the unfortunate looked after and made self-sufficient. Now, there is another area where the federal government can play a part. As an older American, I remember a time when people of different race, creed, or ethnic origin in our land found hatred and prejudice installed in social custom and, yes, in law. There's no story more heartening in our history than the progress that we've made toward the brotherhood of man that God intended for us. Let us resolve there will be no turning back or hesitation on the road to an America rich in dignity and abundant with opportunity for all our citizens. Let us resolve that we, the people, will build an American opportunity society in which all of us, white and black, rich and poor, young and old, will go forward together, arm in arm. Again, let us remember that though our heritage is one of bloodlines from every corner of the earth, we are all Americans pledged to carry on this last best hope of man on earth. Now, I've spoken of our domestic goals and the limitations we should put on our national government. Now let me turn to a task that is the primary responsibility of national government, the safety and security of our people. Today we utter no prayer more fervently than the ancient prayer for peace on earth. Yet history has shown that peace does not come, nor will our freedom be preserved by goodwill alone. There are those in the world who scorn our vision of human dignity and freedom. One nation, the Soviet Union, has conducted the greatest military buildup in the history of man, building arsenals of awesome offensive weapons. We've made progress in restoring our defense capability, but much remains to be done. There must be no wavering by us, nor any doubts by others, that America will meet her responsibilities to remain free, secure, and at peace. There is only one way safely and legitimately to reduce the cost of national security, and that is to reduce the need for it. And this we're trying to do in negotiations with the Soviet Union. We're not just discussing limits on a further increase of nuclear weapons. We seek instead to reduce their number. We seek the total elimination one day of nuclear weapons from the face of the earth. Now, for decades, we and the Soviets have lived under the threat of mutual assured destruction. If either resorted to the use of nuclear weapons, the other could retaliate and destroy the one who had started it. Is there either logic or morality in believing that if one side threatens to kill tens of millions of our people, our only recourse is to threaten killing tens of millions of theirs? I have approved a research program to find, if we can, a security shield that will destroy nuclear missiles before they reach their target. It wouldn't kill people. It would destroy weapons. It wouldn't militarize space. It would help demilitarize the arsenals of Earth. It would render nuclear weapons obsolete. We will meet with the Soviets hoping that we can agree on a way to rid the world of the threat of nuclear destruction. We strive for peace and security, heartened by the changes all around us. Since the turn of the century, the number of democracies in the world has grown fourfold. Human freedom is on the march, and nowhere more so than in our own hemisphere. Freedom is one of the deepest and noblest aspirations of the human spirit. People worldwide hunger for the right of self-determination, for those inalienable rights that make for human dignity and progress. America must remain freedom's staunchest friend, for freedom is our best ally. And it is the world's only hope to conquer poverty and preserve peace. Every blow we inflict against poverty will be a blow against its dark allies of oppression and war. Every victory for human freedom will be a victory for world peace. So we go forward today, a nation still mighty in its youth and powerful in its purpose. With our alliances strengthened, with our economy leading the world to a new age of economic expansion, we look to a future rich in possibilities. And all of this is because we worked and acted together, not as members of political parties, but as Americans. My friends, we live in a world that's lit by lightning. So much is changing and will change, but so much endures and transcends time. History is a ribbon, always unfurling. History is a journey. And as we continue our journey, we think of those who traveled before us. We stand again at the steps of this symbol of our democracy, or we would have been standing at the steps if it hadn't gotten so cold. Now we're standing inside this symbol of our democracy. And we see and hear again the echoes of our past. A general falls to his knees in the hard snow of Valley Forge. A lonely president paces the darkened halls and ponders his struggle to preserve the Union. The men of the Alamo call out encouragement to each other. A settler pushes west and sings a song, and the song echoes out forever and fills the unknowing air. It is the American sound. It is hopeful, big-hearted, idealistic, daring, decent, and fair. That's our heritage. That's our song. We sing it still. For all our problems, our differences, we are together as of old. We raise our voices to the God who is the author of this most tender music. And may he continue to hold us close as we fill the world with our sound in unity, affection, and love. One people, under God, dedicated to the dream of freedom that he has placed in the human heart, called upon now to pass that dream on to a waiting and a hopeful world. God bless you, and may God bless America. Thank you.
The Reagan second inaugural speech. The second inaugural speech, George Washington's, was 135 words long, which is about a minute or two. Second inaugural speeches seem to have a different tone, seem to be gentler, kinder, softer. Maybe the fevers of ambition to reform the world have been cooled a bit by 4 years of discovery and some disappointment.
Some notable differences, David, I think, from the first one. Certainly the inauguration address of a very confident man, the poll showing the other day, who has the favor of 69% of the American people.
I will ask the Reverend Peter Gomes, minister in the Memorial Church at Harvard University, to pronounce the benediction. Following the benediction, these proceedings will be concluded by the playing of the national anthem by the Marine Corps Band.
Let us pray. Almighty God, who hast given us this good land for our heritage, we humbly beseech thee that we may always prove ourselves a people mindful of thy favor and glad to do thy will. Bless our land with honorable industry, sound learning, and pure manners. Save us from discord, violence, and confusion, and the frailty of our own hearts. Defend our liberties, preserve our unity, and fashion into one united people the multitudes brought hither out of many kindreds and tongues. Endue with the spirit of wisdom, prudence, and fortitude the President and the Vice President of these United States, and all those to whom is entrusted the authority of government, to the end that justice and peace may flourish at home and abroad. Make us, with them, equal to our high trusts, reverent in the use of freedom, just in the exercise of power, generous in the protection of weakness. May wisdom and compassion be the stability of our times and our deepest trust in thee, in whom we live and move and have our being. Unto thee, O Lord, we ascribe all honor and glory, and in thanksgiving and in hope we commend now to thy eternal protection ourselves, our nation, and our world. Amen.
United States Marine Band, playing the national anthem, as you point out, David. They played for every president except George Washington. referred to usually as the President's Own, formed back in 1798 by Congress.
It's the oldest musical organization of any nature in this country. The schedule now calls for gathering in Statuary Hall, which, as you face the east front of the Capitol, is to the left, where they will have lunch. About 200 of them. Mrs. Mathias, wife of Senator Mathias, planned the menu.
I like what you said earlier, David, about the mood here. It really does look rather like an engraving of previous inaugurations of another era. It has had a very intimate quality to it.
One of our bills, currency, what is it, $50 bill, or one of them, has an engraving on the back of the Constitutional Convention. Which bill is it?
To be honest,
I don't know.
I don't know either. Somebody will tell us, I'm sure.
Anyway, it looks a bit like this. Clothes are different. George Will and Senator Van Oker have been watching all of this along with you and along with us. George, Sandy, come in, will you?
David, the speech we've just heard was remarkably vintage Ronald Reagan. Of course, the constancy of his views is one of the amazing facts of a political life. It contained a few programmatic remarks, the Strategic Defense Initiative, a balanced budget amendment, a freeze on spending for the next fiscal year, but the basis of it was what I think the Reagan presidency will be remembered for, and that is a conscious attempt to communicate enthusiasm, that's what a president is for, is to set a mood of optimism in the country. He said, as he constantly does, that there are no limits to human growth and progress, that it is within our power, he constantly says, to begin the world anew. Now, it may very well not be true, either of those things, but it may be that it's important for people to believe that it's true. He certainly thinks so.
I was struck by
Sandy?
repeating, if not us, who, if not now, when, talk about controlling governmental growth and spending. And I think the time has now come, we didn't want to ask that in 1980, whether the question is rhetorical or specific. Is Ronald Reagan addressing it to himself and to his second administration? And I think that those questions will be asked in this second term, because he has been on the watch for 4 years now, and I don't think that the Congress or the Washington Press Corps, which has kind of treated him with great gentility and reserve over the past 4 years, is going to be asked questions in such a soft way. It's going to be a tough second term, I believe.
Peter and David, behind us, you can see between the two of us here, the great unused and unusable in this weather reviewing stand. It's interesting to me to recall 4 years ago, I was seated over there watching the parade, sitting behind the president, and the president would periodically turn around and say, the hostages are here, the hostages are in the air, the hostages are in Algeria, this sort of thing. It was such a coincidence. It was another example, almost you'd say, of a Reagan luck, if it didn't coincide with Iranian designs, to have the Reagan presidency begin with the end of the humiliation. And that right there on the reviewing stand 4 years ago, the tone of the Reagan presidency, carried through the Olympics and all the rest this year, was set. That is, that America has to believe that there are no limits.
George, just to get off the theme for a second, Father Healy of Georgetown did in his opening prayer make reference to people who were free and who were captive, and you're absolutely right to point out the differences between now and 4 years ago. But there are still some Americans held captive in Lebanon, 4, David, if I'm not mistaken at the moment.
I think.
Is it 5 now?
But there's no comparison.
Absolutely not, whatsoever.
So, the swearing-in has taken place. The inaugural balls will occur tonight as scheduled. By the way, across the street here, Peter, is an Eddie Bauer store. It sells outdoor clothes. There was a huge run on it yesterday. It was open Sunday. There were women going in their mink coats to buy down coats and so on to wear over their minks, or under them, I'm not sure, because they anticipated the weather, the cold outside. I don't know what they will wear to the ball. We'll see tonight. will all take place as scheduled.
Well, there is a good deal more to come this afternoon, and we're going to, now that you've had a chance to hear the inauguration, the inaugural address, we're going to come back a little later on and hear from people around the country and from overseas what they think of that and what they think of a second term for Ronald Reagan. I hope you'll join us. We'll be right back after these messages and a word from your local station.
ABC News coverage of Inauguration 85 continues. Again, David Brinkley and Peter Jennings.
Peter, if you're planning to take a trivia quiz, I have, since we were talking a minute ago, I found
desperately
out which bill has the Constitutional Convention on the reverse. It's the $2 bill. Don't see them much. That's why I couldn't remember it.
That's when you said it was a 50. I wasn't in touch.
Well, I didn't know. There was some bill I don't see much. So it turns out it's the $2.
We want to spend some time now, as we said a moment ago, talking about the next 4 years, the last 4 years, the inauguration speech itself. And joining us first from Los Angeles, California, is a man who's been dealt rather badly by the Republicans over the course of this presidential campaign, Charles Manat, who was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Mr. Manat, thank you for joining us. First of all, do you see anything particular in the inaugural address which stands out for you?
No, I think it was probably vintage Mr. Reagan. I think obviously today symbolically there are a lot of people on the outside and in the cold, and his policies may well continue in that direction to create difficulties, but I thought it was a very impressive speech.
One of the things that we can't help but notice, and it's reflected in our polls of the last few days, is that 49% of the American people now identify with the Republican Party. And that does not seem to me to bode well for the Democrats over the next 4 years.
Well, Peter, that's very typical at the time of an inauguration of a president. Mr. Reagan, of course, had a very big victory. There's anticipation for successes, hopefully, in his second term. So it would be more relevant, I think, a year from now as we get ready for the '86 elections. To have a high identification with him today would be a normally American thing to do.
Mr. Manat is a Californian, active in politics, and in recent years chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Your party has run against Ronald Reagan 4 times, twice for governor, twice for president, lost all 4. Are you happy you will never have to run against him again?
David, I think you have got that right. I think the only time he ever lost was the Republican nomination. So what the Republicans could do on a time or two, we were never able to do in the general electoral politics. We're very pleased that this is presumptively the last time we face Ronald Reagan.
There are some difficult decisions that have to be made here. You're in Los Angeles.
Yes, I am.
Here in Washington the next 4 years. Some of them politically unpopular. How much will the Democrats in Congress support the president in getting them done?
Well,
budget cuts, for example?
Yeah, it depends on what it is. I think as far as a fair tax and a simplification of the tax program, as you know, our Bradley Gephardt proposal from last year has a lot of support within our party. If it's fair, if it's balanced, and doesn't do violence in an unfair way, I think Democrats will support a tax simplification program. The president's program on the budget, of course, was created because the supply-side economics were supposed to increase the revenues. They didn't. Instead, we've had deficit financing. I think that will be a program-by-program consideration by the Congress on the Democratic side as far as what's balanced and what is fair. What we see, of course, in this administration is great rewards for efficiency and no real concern, it seems like, about our productive capacity when it comes to agriculture, energy independence, and other things like that. We Democrats are quite concerned in those areas.
Mr. Manat, all across the country, as you know, people have been waiting to see what the president would engage himself in the second term. We've seen the beginnings in arms control now. You mentioned tax reform. Do you hear anything today which suggests to you where the president is going to be specifically engaged?
Yes, I think probably in the three areas. The arms control area that all of us as Americans, I think, support, although his Star Wars defense idea we think is inappropriate to bring that about. The tax simplification that I think we can have bipartisan support on. Obviously working on reduction of the foreign trade deficits, helping agriculture that's in desperate shape right now, are, I think, top priority items.
Mr. Manat, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Charles Manat from Los Angeles. While up in the Rotunda on Capitol Hill, people now begin, those invited guests begin to prepare to go into this lunch given by Senator Mathias and Mrs. Mathias in Statuary Hall, where, and we will tell you about that when we get a chance to look at it, Mrs. Mathias has said she has prepared a lunch which the average family in America might sit down to on a feast day?
Well, it would have to be a pretty good feast day for a pretty good average family. It's mousse of sole, I've got it written out here somewhere, sautéed of spinach with lobster and truffle sauce, medallions of veal with morels, wild rice chestnuts, cold pralines souffle with raspberry sauce, and champagne.
Did you mention truffles?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
$260 a pound.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Joining us now, Richard Viguerie, editor of Conservative Digest, and I don't know why he's always called, but he often is the sort of direct mail king of the United States, in part because of his influence through direct mail programs.
I think it's because he is the direct mail king of the United States. You don't deny that, do you?
No, I do, David and Peter. Direct mail has been here for 100+ years. Mr. Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward were at it long before I was born.
We're not doing what you're doing, though, raising money for politics.
Well, it's one of the things that have made the conservatives competitive is that we've been able to go right to the grassroots and take our message to the people, and it's one of the primary reasons why Reagan was elected president.
Mr. Viguerie, I heard you say the other day that the time had come that you were pleased that Ronald Reagan was now going to be Ronald Reagan. What did you mean by that?
Well, there's no question that the conservatives, more times than we'd like, were very frustrated with the first 4 years of the Reagan administration. We didn't think there were very many Reaganites around the president, and second term seems to be heading a little better in our direction.
Show me where you see the signs.
Well, number one, above all, Jim Baker is leaving and Don Regan is coming in. There's no secret that Don Regan wasn't on any conservative short list or long list of who we would have liked to have seen replace Jim Baker. But his main qualification for the job perhaps is that his name was not Jim Baker, and I think he'll be an honest broker, and we'll hear a lot of conservative ideas brought into the Oval Office that we haven't seen for the last 4 years. One day, about 2 weeks ago, we heard 3 people appointed to positions in the cabinet, Bennett, Hodel, and Harrington, all 3 solid conservatives. I don't remember a period of time where we had 3 conservatives announced in one day.
How will you feel if the president decides he has to raise taxes after all?
Well, I think that would be a big blow to his constituents, to the conservatives, to the American people, and I really don't think the president's going to do that. I think he's going to hold firm and keep his promise there. I think that the speech that we heard today was it was written, I understand, by the president himself, and I think this reflected the real Ronald Reagan.
Well, if you were writing a speech, what would you have him say? What would you have had him say today?
Gosh, David, I don't know that I would change anything. I think it was an outstanding speech. I think it was one of the better presidential acceptance speeches. I think he touched all the bases in a general way. He didn't talk about a constitutional amendment for prayer or for busing, and I'm not sure this was the place for it. But he talked about family, work, traditional values, that our principles haven't failed us, but we've failed our principles. And I think he is raising the people's consciousness on the issues of importance to him and his coalition, his constituents out there. And now we're going to see him fill in the blanks here as the days and weeks go by.
Well, if it was a speech in which you would hardly have changed a word, you should be very happy today.
Conservatives are. It's a high time, and I'm sure the Democrats are very down, as Chuck Manette seemed to indicate, and it's a high time for conservatives. We've heard many of the president's supporters in the White House say during the last 4 years, wait till the second term, wait till the second term. Well, the second term is now underway about 45 minutes an hour, and we can hardly wait.
Mr. Viguerie, thank you. Thanks very much.
We'll be back in just a minute. The lunch in Statuary Hall is about to begin. Statuary Hall, for those of you who visited the Capitol, you will recall, is the place where for 50 years Congress, the House of Representatives, actually met, and where each state is allowed to place 2 statues honoring the distinguished citizens of that particular state. It's going to be quite a lunch, and Charles Gibson has prepared a report for us on what's going to happen. Charles?
They gather in Statuary Hall, which long ago was the chamber where the House of Representatives gathered. It is a room filled with history. Every 4 years, it also gets filled with tables. And in effect, the United States government sits down to lunch. The head table today, the President, the Vice President, the Chief Justice, the Speaker of the House, and Maryland's Senator Mathias. At the 20 tables, the Cabinet, members of the Senate, of the House, from the Judiciary, and from local governments. Also this time, something different.
For the first time in this peculiarly American setting will sit a Russian. The Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, Anatoly Dobrynin, has been invited, as have 6 just plain folks. They've invited Marilyn Hamilton, a handicapped California businesswoman, Charles Stover, a local union official from Maryland, Ernest Moss, a Texas firefighter. Also there, a truck driver, a farmer, even an undercover narcotics detective who wants to maintain his cover and his dignity.
I have a street language and a street knowledge for the past 13 years, whereas I talk street talk as far as drugs and slang words, and I would have to clean up my vocabulary a little bit.
All were surprised at the invitations.
I figured that to get invited to the inauguration, you'd have to have contributed a couple $100,000 to the president's campaign or something like that, but we have not, of course, sent any money. We're having enough trouble supporting ourselves.
And all made special preparations.
I brought me a raincoat, and I never had one in my life. You know, one of those that they wear and wash them. I went up there in March, and every person I saw up there had one on. One of these, you know, London fogs in it around. Whether it was raining or not, it was warm or anything, they had one of those coats on. I said, well, I'm going to buy me one, but I didn't ever wear it, so I brought it home. I still got it. I think I'll take it with me, though.
Well, they are gathering now in Statuary Hall, and the luncheon will be proceeding in a few moments. And the only thing, gentlemen, I can tell you for sure, I have not found anybody going in there wearing a London fog raincoat. David, Peter.
Thank you, Charles. Among you've heard some of who is there. Tell you who is not there. Who is not there is Walter Mondale. His office only says that he is out of town, won't say where he is. Mr. Dobrynin, you said, was there, Charles?
Yeah, they invite a number of people who haven't come. Walter Mondale, as a former vice president, was invited, not as a losing candidate. Former vice presidents invited, former presidents invited, but all, President Ford, President Nixon, and President Carter could not make it or chose not to come.
Charles, I have just one question. We've been talking about what it looked like on the television screen, this rather informal second inaugural ceremony. What did it feel like in there?
Well, pretty informal. You know, this whole thing was thrown together so fast. I was talking to Senator Mathias. You used a little bit of the interview earlier. And they really had to do this in about 12 hours. They had 2.5 months of planning for this inauguration. And there really were no contingency plans to come in here. And 2 hours before this thing all began, at 9:30, I can tell you this room was chaos. People were running around. They didn't know which members of the press were going to get in. They didn't know exactly which guests were going to get here. It has all been thrown together, and if you showed up and you had a credential that looked okay, well, maybe you could get in.
Charles, thank you very much. We now, as I said, wait for the president to come to Statuary Hall with Mrs. Reagan now for this lunch given by the Congressional Inauguration Committee by Senator and Mrs. Mathias.
There's a head table there, as you see, and I believe, what did he say, 21 round tables around the hall. The hall is enormous, quite handsome.
This is the one element of the program today which has not been affected at all by the weather. And as the president, Mrs. Reagan, and the others sit down for lunch, ABC's Britt Hume is standing by with Senator Byrd. Britt?
I am with Senator Byrd, the floor leader for the Democrats in the Senate, Peter, and I wanted to ask you, Senator, David Brinkley observed earlier, and I think correctly, that the tone of this speech by President Reagan today was somewhat gentler than the tone of his speech several years ago. And nevertheless, it did seem that the president is not going to stand pat, and he's going to send up here a number of programs, and one of them that has not been talked about very much today is a tax reform plan, or at least I think if we can read between the lines, he's going to send that up here. Charles Manat was saying just a little while ago that he thinks there'll be bipartisan support for that. What do you think, Senator?
First, as to the tone, I think that the president made an excellent speech, and he always makes the kind of speech that invokes the memories of the past and projects the optimism that he himself personally feels. And I think that optimism is very much in key among the American people. They're basically optimistic. De Tocqueville, 150 years ago, said of Americans, he said, the incredible American believes that if something has not yet been accomplished, it is because he has not yet attempted it. Now, as to the tax reform subject, there are a lot of tax reform measures around, tax freezes and budget freezes and all those things. We Democrats will take a good look at what the president proposes. We will take a good look at his budget, which will come up on February 4, And we'll also take a good look at the budget that Mr. Dole and the majority party in the Senate are working out. And we'll work with the Republicans. We want to cooperate where we can. It should be bipartisan where we can make it that way. Where we differ, we'll have our own proposal.
Well, what is your sense, though, about this concept of tax simplification now? The President has not specifically endorsed the plan that Secretary Reagan brought over to him. The Secretary observed that it was written on a word processor, suggesting that it can be changed. But what is your idea about the concept, and what is the sense among the Democrats you're leading here on the Hill about that concept? Is that popular, something you feel that you're called upon to back, or what?
The American people want tax simplification. We Democrats want tax simplification also. The code is too complex, and it is perhaps not fair, not viewed as being fair by the people. So we'll take a good look at that. Tax simplification, yes. Tax reform, yes. But I want to be sure that we look closely at the impact that a simplification measure might have on industries that are very investment high.
I understand. Peter and David, you want to have a word here?
Yeah, I would like to ask the Senator a question about tax reform. Those we have seen so far are offered as simpler, fairer, so on, so on. But they don't raise any more money. They don't do anything about the deficit. What about that, Senator?
You're right. I haven't seen them, but that's my understanding of most of them. The deficit, we Democrats believe that there must be a reduction in the federal budget so as to cut back the federal deficit. But we want the measures that are taken to reduce that deficit to be fair and equitable to all Americans. And we also want the future insured by virtue of education for our young people and research. And we want to act in such a way as to increase the strength of our industrial and manufacturing capabilities so as to deal with the unfairness in world markets and so as to provide jobs for Americans and enhance our national security.
Senator, thank you. Thank you very much for talking with us today.
Sam Donaldson is now standing by with Senator Robert Dole up on the Hill as well. Sam, take it away.
Well, Senator Dole has just come out of this luncheon that's beginning. You heard the inaugural address, a very ambitious program. Do you think from the standpoint of the domestic agenda, the President can get all that through the Congress?
Well, I really believe we have to wait for the State of the Union message to get it in detail. This was sort of a uplifting general speech talking about America and the economy and all these areas that the President wanted to touch on, and bipartisanship. But we're not there yet.
But he did say that he wants a tax reform, and he suggested that he means this year. Any chance of that?
Well, again, I think we have to wait and see what he finally embraces in tax reform. I don't know that he's embraced the package that's floating around out there. He may want it modified, but those specifics will come when the President makes the State of the Union address on February 6th.
Now, there's a story out, Senator, that you and your colleagues in the Senate, the Republican leadership, will agree with the White House on a package of some $50 billion of cuts for the fiscal 86 budget. Is that correct?
We hope it's at least $50 billion, but we want to get into the next 2 years. And I think the President, I think I heard him say $50 billion this year. There are a couple other years that we're concerned about, so we want to talk about fiscal 87 and fiscal 88 as well as fiscal year 86.
To get the $50 billion, you are going to have to cut deeper into the rate of increase for the Defense Department than the President is suggesting, would you not?
That's my view. I've just spoken briefly with Secretary Weinberger. He seems to have a little different view.
Well, what is he saying now?
That he really doesn't have enough.
Well,
and
that's a negotiating position, isn't it?
Right on a recent talk show when he indicated maybe we were squeezing that budget too much. We're not going to squeeze any of these areas we're talking about in the arms control negotiations. We've got to believe there are other savings in the Pentagon that can be made. If we can make them in every other program, or nearly every other program, they can make them in defense.
Senator Dole, now one final question, which is the Bob Dole Memorial question these days, and that is someday, do you plan to be here at this Capitol, and when they say raise your right hand to take the oath for the presidency, it's Bob Dole's hand that goes up?
Well, I did look around this morning just in case, something's going to happen 4 years from now, and I looked at Jack Kemp, and I watched George Bush, and, just keeping an eye on things, but I didn't really think too much about 88.
Well, Howard Baker was standing in the background. the man who preceded you as Senate Majority Leader. What about him?
Well, I didn't see him, but I'm glad he was there. You know.
Thank you very much, Senator Dole. We appreciate your time here. Senator Dole is going into the luncheon with the other dignitaries, which is underway in Statuary Hall, which is right through that doorway there. And he seems to reflect, in conversation with people who were right here in the rotunda and heard the speech, sort of the consensus on the president's speech. It was uplifting. He said we were poised on the brink of greatness as a country, and there were things in that speech that, as George Will has already observed, are consistent with Mr. Reagan's political philosophy ever since he became a Republican and changed from being a Democrat. But the thing that did strike me, and I think the senator has just sort of reflected on it, is that it was an ambitious agenda that he laid out. Ronald Reagan seemed to be saying to the country, I'm not just going to go to sleep for the next 4 years. If I get my way, we're going to hit the ground running, and we're going to accomplish even more in the next 4 years than we did in the first 4. But as Senator Dole has sagely observed, using that great cliche of journalism and politicians, only time will tell. Gentlemen?
Well, and of course, Sam, one thing that did not come out in that is that Ronald Reagan doesn't have to run again on this, and Senator Dole and a lot of other Republicans are going to have to run on whatever gets decided in the next 4 years.
Peter, I think you have to be crazy to enjoy it, so I plead guilty to that. But listening to the politicians answering questions about what they're going to do is like watching somebody trying to slip through a Russian minefield and escape to West Berlin. Everything is, well, we will look at that. What happens after you look at it? Well, they won't answer. What will you do about this? We will have to wait and see. Typical politicians.
Really listening to Senator Byrd, weren't you? Yes. I can tell. We're going to have much more. We're going to talk to overseas in a short while. We want to hear what they think of this in Western Europe. Pierre Salinger is in Paris, and we clearly want to hear what the Soviet Union thinks of that. And so we'll be right back after these messages and a word from your local station.
ABC News continuing coverage of Inauguration 85. From ABC News headquarters in Washington, David Brinkley and Peter Jennings.
Mr. Reagan is now installed, of course. When he first became president, as you know, Peter, you were in Europe at that time, there was a good deal of doubt, skepticism about him among foreign leaders and foreign thinkers and scholars and writers and so on.
More than doubt. General antipathy.
Right.
General antipathy.
Which I understand. We're going to talk to some overseas spokesmen, find out about it. I understand has changed a bit in the last 4 years. Is that your impression?
Very much so. I was overseas just a couple of weeks ago on our way to Geneva for the Soviet-American talks, and particularly in Britain, where the president was very viciously caricatured at the beginning of his first term. The cowboy image was prevalent throughout almost, well, not all British reporting by any means, but throughout a great deal of it, and in Holland and in Belgium and in France as well. And it is true that it has changed quite dramatically, as we found in the last few years. And of course, the person who I think can describe that best to us at the moment is Pierre Salinger, who is standing by in Paris today, and has prepared, first of all, before we have a chat with Pierre, a piece on what Europeans are thinking at the moment.
When Ronald Reagan ran for president in 1980, the Europe of traditional politics couldn't believe it. Their perception of Reagan was that of a cowboy, a mediocre B-movie actor. And they asked repeatedly, what is this man doing running for president of the United States? After 4 years in the White House, Reagan's image has improved considerably. In many European countries, polls indicate their citizens here also would have re-elected Reagan in 1984. That is certainly true in France, where an election day poll showed Reagan over Mondale by a 38% to 25% margin. France's confidence in U.S. support of the defense of Western Europe has risen since Mr. Reagan came to power, as has the overall image of the United States. Europeans admire the turnaround of the U.S. economy and the strengthening of U.S. defense capabilities. But in France, West Germany, and Italy, the ballooning U.S. budget deficit, high interest rates, and the runaway dollar have all come under criticism as destabilizing to their own economies. Peace and dialogue are also European concerns. The recent Geneva talks were seen as an encouraging sign that the Reagan administration is now determined to talk about the spiraling arms race. But the fear persists that the United States and the Soviet Union may make agreements which do not take into account European needs and objectives. And matters are complicated by persistent health rumors surrounding Soviet Premier Chernenko. In the Soviet Union, Mr. Reagan's image remains poor. The Soviets have never liked or trusted this president. They still portray him as a warmonger who needs to be restrained from plunging the globe into World War III. Following Geneva, Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko's tough press conference in Moscow demonstrated continuing distrust in the Reagan administration. In Israel, Reagan is considered a friend, but not in the class of Richard Nixon. The Israelis have already been warned of tough terms for needed military and economic assistance. They are pleased, however, with the exceptionally close security relationship they have established with the Reagan administration during the first term. In South Africa, Reagan is popular with white voters, but the president's recent remarks on the evils of apartheid have made the Pretoria government uneasy about what the Reagan administration may do during its second term.
But nowhere in the world is Mr. Reagan referred to anymore as a second-rate actor. 4 years in the White House has convinced most people, whether they like him or not, that he is a leader. Gentlemen?
Well, Pierre, this is undoubtedly a time for speculation in Western Europe, as it is here as well. What's the speculation about the next 4 years? Do they think Mr. Reagan is going to be consistent in terms of talking arms control with the Soviets, for example? Europeans still worried that they'll be abandoned?
Well, Europeans are concerned about the Star Wars aspect because they fear that if the administration goes ahead with it and does succeed in building an umbrella defense of the United States, it might forget Europe. However, here in Europe, there is right now optimism about the direction of U.S.-Soviet talks. There is hope that Mr. Reagan, looking at his second term as a way to history, will stay on the line of negotiations with the Soviet Union and that they will yield some results.
Pierre, their first skepticism and, in fact, I gather, active dislike of Mr. Reagan, was it rooted in the fact that he was an actor in B-movies or that he did not live up to the 19th century European vision of a political leader, a man of great dignity and presence who had served in all kinds of smaller political offices, gradually rising to the top? What do you think about that?
Well, David, I think the fact that he was an actor played a great role here in Europe. There are very few actors who have ever made it politically here in Europe. And that when talking about him as an actor and a cowboy, they overlooked the fact that he had been for 8 years governor of California. That was something that you didn't hear very much about when Mr. Reagan was running for office in the first term. But now I think this first term has succeeded in convincing many Europeans that there was more to Mr. Reagan than appeared when he was running. And they are particularly admiring of what he did as far as the U.S. economy is concerned, particularly here in Europe where the economies are not in very good shape.
Yeah, that's you lead me right to my next question, Pierre. What about the strength of the U.S. dollar? I know it's got people in Europe very upset.
Well, I mean, it's a two-way street, Peter. I mean, the dollar has helped exports of Western European countries. It has also cost Western European countries a great deal more to import things like oil, which they have to pay for in dollars. There is nobody in Western Europe that would ever tell you what the real level of the dollar that would please them is. I remember when the dollar was in France at 3.85. Today it's 9.75. When it was 3.85, we were accused of stepping all over the Europeans and dumping our products in Western Europe.
Pierre, can we get you to stand by for a few minutes while we invite somebody else to join this conversation? Vladimir Posner in Moscow. It's interesting to note that in his first inaugural address, President Reagan did not mention the Soviet Union. Today he did, and Mr. Posner, thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Posner is a Radio Moscow correspondent, or commentator, as you can see on your screen there, who is a fairly regular guest on programs like Nightline. Mr. Posner, the President referred to those today who scorn our vision of human dignity and freedom, and he was clearly referring to the Soviet Union. What do you think the state of relations is at the moment?
Well, at the moment, it looks pretty much the same as it was soon after Mr. Reagan became president. That kind of rhetoric was used over the past 4 years, time and time again. Sometimes it was more vicious, sometimes it was less. And I don't see any real change, except, of course, the fact that now we are talking as a result of Geneva. But if you look more basically, I would say that you'd have to look very carefully to see any real element of change in the relationship.
Do you think the Soviet view of Mr. Reagan has changed in the last 4 years?
Well, I think that we differ from Europeans in our assessment of what a leader should be. If you look at our own leaders, you'll find that most of them are first-generation peasant stock or worker stock. That is, we're not at all in the tradition of the European aristocratic kind of assessment. So that, one way or the other, doesn't trouble us. The trouble with Mr. Reagan, as far as we were concerned from the very first day, was his attitude toward the Soviet Union. In the first pre-election campaign, was clearly very, very, very anti-Soviet and a kind of a leader of a new anti-Soviet crusade. And that doesn't seem to have changed much. So if you look at it that way, I don't think that there's been much of a change insofar as how the Soviets assessed President Reagan. And the whole idea of a great B actor, while it did appear in the press and the media here, it was never a big thing. That was not stressed. What we really cared about and care about is the relationship between the two countries.
Mr. Posner, you know as well as I do that there are caricatures of Soviet leaders in American papers. I wonder how you think, as a Soviet citizen, of the caricatures of Mr. Reagan, which presently appear in your press. Aren't they counterproductive?
I don't think caricatures are really all that important. I don't know as to how much they influence the thought, the outlook of the average man in the street. I can tell you that in this country, as far as I can judge, caricatures really are not at all part of what plays on our feelings. Perhaps because they're not as good as yours, but they don't work that way.
How is Mr. Chernenko?
I haven't seen him for a while, so I can't tell you.
We're told he's in the hospital. Can you confirm that?
No, I cannot.
David?
I'm finished. George Will has a question for you, Mr. Posner. George?
Yes. Mr. Posner, one of the things that the President did stress with remarkable specificness in his talk today was the Strategic Defense Initiative, sometimes called Star Wars, and that is said to be a stumbling block. Now, the President would have to be said to have said in this speech today, A, we're for arms control, but B, we're standing firm on that program, the elimination of which your government says is necessary for arms control. Does that depress you?
Yes, it does. It does because after having spoken to people, I mean, I'm not an expert on arms control, but after having spoken to people who seem to be very much knowledgeable in that area, the whole idea of the shield seems to be a very dangerous one, and this includes a lot of American experts like Jeremy Stone and others who I've spoken to.
Well,
so I am very depressed.
I gather then from your reading of your listening to the President's address, and I guess you did hear it, then would you say you would not be optimistic about there being arms control over the next 4 years?
Well, it's hard to be optimistic when you see that some of the basic stumbling blocks not only exist but seem to be bolstered by this speech. We all here hope that there will be progress. We know it took 7 years to develop SALT II, which didn't come to anything. These talks are even more ambitious, basically. And if there's not going to be any, if there's going to be only take and no give, then of course it's hard to be optimistic.
Mr. Posner, I think everybody'd like to have a go at you at the moment. Pierre Salinger has a question for you.
Well, first, there's a kind of an irony, something Mr. Posner said, how you get to be a Soviet leader. I think people forget that Mr. Reagan not only was an actor, but he was also a union leader. And being a union leader is a way to leadership in the Soviet Union. But the question I want to ask Mr. Posner, isn't it a fact that one of the reasons the Soviets decided to come back to the negotiating table was the realization that Mr. Reagan was going to be there for 4 more years, and therefore they couldn't stay away for 4 years from talking to the United States?
I don't really think that's the reason. I think it was obvious that we had to talk and you have to talk. I mean, things just couldn't stay the way they were. I think it was clear to President Reagan. It was always clear to our leadership. And whoever's the president, you speak to him. Things had gotten to a point where we were simply not talking about anything, and that's very dangerous. And I really don't care who made the first gesture. I don't think that's important. What's important is that at least we're in the talking stage.
Mr. Posner, in this country at the moment, there is a fairly high level of optimism about arms control talks, even as you point out, previous arms control talks have taken exceedingly lengthy periods of time to negotiate. Can you make any judgment about whether or not there's any real sense of optimism in Moscow?
Well, I've spoken to a lot of people, and I would say that basically there is hope. But I would say that it's very cautious.
Excuse me?
Pardon me?
Just listening to you.
No, we're just listening.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Sorry. I said the optimism is there, but it's very cautious. There's a feeling that this is going to take a very long time. There are some doubts as to whether or not the words that have been spoken by President Reagan, including in today's speech, really mean a sincere desire to do away with nuclear weapons, or whether it's simply propaganda and a way to draw the talks out ceaselessly while the development goes on of the most dangerous kinds of weapons. So there is optimism, but it's very cautious, and nobody's going overboard on this.
Here.
Mr. Posner, are you not encouraged by the fact that at Geneva, the United States agreed to put the Star Wars project on the negotiating table?
I don't think that's quite true. I think we were talking more about the anti-satellite program, right? The anti-satellite rather than the Star Wars as the anti-nuclear program is concerned. I think there's a...
Well, I mean, it is an anti-satellite program.
Well, the anti-satellite program basically is one thing. The Star Wars program is the anti-missile program, and it's been stressed that they're separate. And I don't think that there's going to be much talk about that as far as I can gather.
Mr. Posner, thank you very much. And Pierre, thanks a lot. We'll be back with more in a moment.
We're going to continue with our inaugural broadcast now and go to London, where ABC's Barry Dunsmore is standing by and with a guest. Barry?
Well, Peter, of all of America's allies, Ronald Reagan probably is closer personally and ideologically to Britain's Prime Minister Thatcher. However, in that first term, even she was concerned about the drift and deterioration in U.S.-Soviet relations and the total lack of progress in arms control. She seems to be happier now. The British support the idea of research of the Star Wars program, but privately they express doubts that it ever will or should be deployed. Generally speaking, however, things are good, and Mrs. Thatcher and Mr. Reagan are very much on the same wavelength. I don't think quite the same can be said, however, of our guest today, Mr. Dennis Healey, who is a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, former Defense Minister, and now the foreign policy spokesman for the Labour Party. Mr. Healey, we've heard a lot of talk about letting Reagan be Reagan. How does that strike you for a second term?
Well, those who use that phrase, of course, really mean they wanted to be much more right-wing second time than he was first. All the indications are that he'll be less right-wing than he was the first time. And what's encouraged us here is that he seems to have put Mr. Schultz, whom we trust, in charge of the arms negotiations, and there seems more chance of Washington getting its act together this time than there was before. We were appalled during the last term that there never seemed to be any coherence in the American approach to arms control. Indeed, you were 2 years into the term before it even began. We feel that the Russians are ready to talk now. It's very important that Reagan strikes while the iron is hot, because his own influence in Washington will begin to diminish round about Easter next year because of the midterm elections and then, of course, the run-up to the election of another president. And the signs are good so far. I'm not worried about the Russians say about research into Star Wars, because they're carrying out similar research themselves. And in any case, there won't be any way of telling whether this is going to work in the long run until long after President Reagan has left office. So the really important thing is to get on with the immediate things, strategic weapons, intermediate weapons, and of course anti-satellite weapons, which are very, very much closer than the others. And we hope very much that the new Reagan administration will take a more coherent and urgent approach on these problems. We're encouraged on the whole by most of the appointments, but we should be looking for progress early this year.
Mr. Healey, you have met with Chernenko and Mr. Gorbachev, who was guessed to be his successor. What is your sense as to how they really feel about the United States and whether they really and truly are afraid of Star Wars?
I think they were really frightened at a period during the last Reagan administration when he was talking about Russia being an evil empire, reviving some of the rhetoric he'd used before he was president about Russia being the source of all evil in the world. And they were determined to see whether the softer tone he adopted during the election campaign would survive the election. They were encouraged to find that it did survive the election, and I believe the private talks between Art Hartman in Washington and Gromyko and between Dobrynin and Mr. Schultz encouraged them further, and I think encouraged the Americans. For me personally, one of the most useful developments since the election has been America's readiness to talk to the Russians not just about arms control, but also about the regional problems which could land Russia and America in fighting one another even if they didn't want it, like the Middle East, Southern Africa, Central America. And these talks, I think, may well create the right political climate for faster progress on arms control.
As a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, watching the pound go down, how much are you worried about the American deficit question? Is that key to you?
I've never been so worried as many in Europe, and I think Pierre Salinger was right in saying that you can never satisfy the Europeans about American economic policy. The fact is, at the moment, the Europeans are gaining enormously in their exports to the United States from a high dollar, but we are very worried that if sentiment turns round and the money flows out, then America may have high interest rates, the world recovery collapse, and that will do us all damage. So we do hope progress is made quickly on reducing the deficit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dennis Healy. Peter?
Barry, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Healy. It's very interesting if you've been listening to us for the last half hour, because there you have Dennis Healy, who is a Labour Party member in Great Britain, saying that President Reagan is not going to be more conservative in the next 4 years. And we heard earlier Richard Viguerie, who's the editor of Conservative Digest, saying he's delighted because Mr. Reagan is going to be conservative for 4 more years. It really proves the point, I think, that at the beginning of a second term, as we have had so few since the end of the Second World War, we really don't know exactly what's going to happen.
It also proves the word conservative means different things to different people.
Exactly. We'll be right back after these messages and a word from your local station.
ABC News coverage of Inauguration 85 continues.
You are looking at the west face of the Capitol, where the inauguration ceremonies were supposed to have been held today, but it was 7 degrees when President Reagan was sworn in under the great dome of the rotunda, and that, of course, as you, I'm sure now know, was the reason it was not held outside. David, as so often happens during these programs, we've had a phone call and one pointing out an omission. We've been talking a lot about the bands that were going to march today and who weren't able to because of the crowds, and somebody has very correctly called to point out that there are 640 horsemen who've come from around the country to participate in this inauguration ceremony. And what about them? Our caller said. Very true indeed. We didn't
well, what
mention
about them? What's the question? They're not going to march either.
They're not going to do the march either. I assume horses have a great deal easier time than tubas.
Yeah, yes, but the horses would have riders.
And I'm sorry we forgot them. It's my point here.
All right. George, Sandy, what's been happening down there? What are your thoughts at this time?
Well, nothing's happening. There's just nobody but us electronic chickens are down here. George and I have been talking about, well, we're waiting about politics. And I think a question was raised, what's he going to do in his next term? I don't have a clue. I called out to Sacramento and asked people what was Ronald Reagan's second term like as governor. It's not comparable. Fought on tax withholding, caved in, and started running for the presidency. There is this point to be made. Since the Republican Party was founded in Ripon, Wisconsin, February 1854, only 2 Republicans have been elected and served out their terms, Ulysses S. Grant and Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower is our closest in time for a historical approximation, but I don't think the times are the same then, and I don't have a clue as to what Ronald Reagan is going to do, except continue to be about the most masterful politician that we've had since Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Sandy, I have a question for George. George, looking back on the 4 years, everybody at the beginning, not everybody, but a great many people at the beginning of the 4 years say he was not going to be successful. Now he's been successful in large measure. Was it him, in your view, or was it timing?
Well, I think the man and the moment were clearly met, Peter, but I think Ronald Reagan knows, as Dwight Eisenhower knew, as a number of other successful people have known, that one of the keys to success in Washington is to be underestimated within the Washington Beltway. Works wonders every time. I remember, Peter and David, 4 years ago, 2 days after the inauguration, I was allowed in to see the president, had an exclusive interview with Newsweek magazine. It was complete chaos, and as a matter of fact, during the interview, the Secret Service came piling through the doors in a great scramble because Michael Deaver, getting used to his office next door, had hit an emergency call button. It means the Russians are coming or something of the sort. But anyway, in the midst of this, I asked, with the impudence for which journalists are justly notorious, I said, well, are you going to run again? This was 2 days into the term. The president smiled that enigmatic smile of his and said, well, you know, if I hadn't had a second term as governor of California, I never would have got that of which I am most proud. And he meant the welfare reform in California. He was a very ambitious second-term governor, very active, very compromising. He was very moderate. Now, by the way, that brings us back to something Mr. Viguerie said. For 4 years, we've heard conservatives saying, we love Ronald Reagan, we just wish they, some antecedentless pronoun, would let Reagan be Reagan. Jim Baker was supposedly governing the president. Well, it's kind of insulting to begin with to the president to say this. We now hear it said that maybe Nancy Reagan won't let Reagan be Reagan. Fact is, Ronald Reagan is a fairly mainstream, moderate politician, always has been, always will be.
If I can just add one thing to George's remark about Nancy Reagan. I don't know, suddenly everybody's discovered she's a powerful person. She's always been powerful. Indeed, I'm told that the reason why Secretary Schultz is in such high favor now, because she sent word to him to become more social with the president, and from that a lot of other things rose, including his ascendancy in foreign policy now.
Thank you both. You both look quite warm and comfortable, so we'll ask you to stay there for a while, and we'll come back to you. How many of you remember where you were 4 years ago, 4 years plus a day ago, to be specific? I know where I was, in Frankfurt, West Germany, waiting for the hostages to be released from Iran. When we come back, a really wonderful recollection by Ted Koppel on what it was like 4 years and 1 day ago. At this point in the early afternoon Eastern Time, the President and Mrs. Reagan, the Vice President and Mrs. Bush are still the guests of the Congressional Inaugural Committee, still having lunch inside Statuary Hall. It should be over in about half an hour, 220 people sitting down, including 6 described as ordinary citizens, invited to the lunch today to indicate that this inaugural celebration had a reflection of true democracy. We'll hear what that lunch was like in about half an hour from now. But as I said just before we went away, 4 years and 1 day ago, a very different mood in this country and much of the Western world. Ted Koppel reminds us what went on.
For Jimmy Carter, day 444 begins just as the last 2 days have begun. Without sleep, exhausted, surrounded by aides in the Oval Office, President Carter is desperately trying to salvage this symbolic victory for his administration, to free the 52 American hostages before Ronald Reagan takes the oath of office at noon. The first good news comes at 3:17 a.m. The Iranians have accepted the plan to transfer some $8 billion in Iranian assets, frozen in U.S. banks, to Iran via a bank in London. While the money is Iranian, it is nevertheless a form of ransom. The plan is mobilized. 6:47 a.m. Treasury Secretary William Miller calls. The electronic transfer of funds from U.S. banks to London is complete.
Right on, man. That's great. That's great.
The Oval Office vigil continues. Carter breaks to dress for the inauguration. There is still no inkling of the irony that lies ahead. For Jimmy Carter, who had himself become a captive of the hostage crisis, there is still hope that the hostages will be freed while he is still in office. 11 a.m. The President and the President-elect leave the White House together en route to the inauguration ceremony. Carter is receiving updates by telephone in the presidential limousine, and still no hostage release. The incredible manipulation of this day in history is becoming clearer. Shortly after 11 a.m., Peter Jennings reports from Frankfurt.
Now an official of PARS, the official Iranian news agency, has just said that the departure of the hostages is imminent.
11:30. Reports of the hostage release are flying fast and furiously now. With Ronald Reagan's oath of office now only 30 minutes away, Jimmy Carter, on his way to the inaugural podium, is questioned by Sam Donaldson.
Mr. President, are the hostages out?
Can't say yet.
Not yet. Not yet. Is that what he said, Frank? I couldn't hear it.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet. They've cheated him. They've cheated him right down to the end.
But at 11:38, some 20 minutes before the oath of office, teletype alarm bells sound all over the world.
What's happening, and this will mean a lot more, I suppose, to journalists out there, UPI has just gone with a flash, which is, in effect, the highest, the most important notification of news that they can give. The last time they did it was with the Kennedy assassination. It's 2 words. It says, hostages freed.
In fact, it is premature. The hostages have not yet boarded their plane.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain.
10 minutes later, at 11:50, as the ceremonies on Capitol Hill begin, the hostages run a jeering gauntlet of Iranian students yelling, "Death to America" and "Death to Carter," as they are put aboard the Algerian 727 that will finally take them to freedom.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
12:03. Ronald Reagan takes his oath of office. An exhausted Jimmy Carter listens.
Well, this administration's objective will be a healthy, vigorous, growing economy.
At Mehrabad Airport in Tehran, the Iranian captors are listening also to Reagan's inaugural address. The hostages are still not airborne. The ceremony ends about 12:25. Some 7 minutes later, the planes bearing the hostages and Algerian officials take off from Iran. A final insult to Jimmy Carter, making it technically impossible for him to take credit for their release for his administration. In a holding room just after the ceremony, the new president is briefed by Press Secretary James Brady. 7 minutes later, public confirmation as well.
If it's possible for this diverse nation of 226 million to have unanimity on anything, perhaps the time is now to give a unanimous hallelujah. And for the reason for that, let's go immediately to Peter Jennings in Frankfurt.
Ted, hallelujah indeed. Behzad Nabavi, the chief Iranian negotiator, has just confirmed that the Algerian aircraft carrying the hostages have left Tehran, and so does Iran's Mehrabad airport tower, confirming the American hostages finally are on their way. Unless there is the most ultimate manipulation, it has finally happened.
Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale, now private citizens, leave the capital for Andrews Air Force Base. They are briefed by mobile phone en route. At Andrews, Carter gets a hug from Anita Schaefer, wife of hostage Colonel Thomas Schaefer. He tells her, "I'll see him tomorrow." Back at the Capitol, Ronald Reagan confirms to reporters that the hostages have been freed.
Does it require any action on your part now?
No, both planes are airborne.
Where do you understand they're going, Mr. President?
The flight is to take them to Algiers, and where they change to American planes to go to Wiesbaden.
In Iran, the plane bearing the hostages is clearing Iranian airspace at 1:50 p.m. President Reagan breaks the news as he gives the toast at the traditional Inauguration Day luncheon with congressional leaders.
Some 30 minutes ago, the planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
In Washington, a 2.5-hour parade gets underway, while all across the nation, the outpouring of sentiment for the hostages has begun.
God bless America, my home sweet home, for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly seen.
3:41 p.m. In a chill drizzle, now former President Jimmy Carter's helicopter touches down in Plains, Georgia, to a hometown hero's welcome. He speaks publicly for the first time since Ronald Reagan became president.
Just a few moments ago, on Air Force One, before we landed Warner Robins, I had received word officially for the first time that the aircraft carrying the 52 American hostages had cleared Iranian airspace on the first leg of a journey home, and that every one of the 52 hostages was alive, was well, and free.
As Carter speaks about the crisis that may have cost him his presidency, the hostages make their first stop on friendly soil, a short refueling stop in Athens. Next stop, Algiers. The marching bands continue down Pennsylvania Avenue, but the nation's attention is turning to Algeria. At 4:50, the C-9 Nightingales arrive, the U.S. medevac planes that will carry the hostages on the next leg of their freedom flight.
The gray planes, white top, American flag with a red cross on the tail, are taxiing now to their parking spaces here at the airport, waiting for the 52 American hostages who are on their way here from Tehran.
In Washington, the national Christmas tree, kept dark in honor of the hostages under orders from President Carter, is burning brightly now, and there are fireworks over the mall. Then, at 8:10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, what 52 families and an entire nation had been waiting 444 days to see, the first glimpse of the hostages out of captivity.
Frank, there we are.
Yes.
That is Elizabeth Swift, I believe, on the left, and Catherine Cove just behind her, coming off, two of them wearing their yellow ribbons.
In cities and towns across the nation, television cameras crowd the living rooms of the hostage families one final time, as the cameras watch the families, in turn watching television, waiting for the moment of recognition. Algerian cameras pan the faces of what are now the former hostages, returnees, the State Department is calling them. An hour and a half later, at 9:42, they are on their way to Frankfurt. Back in Washington, Ronald and Nancy Reagan are going from party to party. The inaugural balls are in full swing, fueled by a new euphoria about the hostage release and a return to the opulence of inaugurations past. There are parties, too, aboard the two C-9 medevac planes. They land at Frankfurt's Rhein-Main Air Force Base at 12:45 a.m., and the hostages, wearing new parkers and less dazed expressions, greet an enthusiastic throng of fellow Americans. They board buses for the short ride to the military hospital. Their last day of captivity is now over. So is the presidency of Jimmy Carter, so fatefully tied to those 52 hostages. 4 years later, Jimmy Carter is teaching and writing at Emory University in Atlanta. Hamilton Jordan, the presidential assistant who helped negotiate the hostage release, lives outside Atlanta and is writing a book. Former Iranian President Bani Sadr, who always claimed he was opposed to the taking of the hostages, fled Iran and was granted political asylum in France on July 29, 1981. And Foreign Minister Sadek Gotspade was executed on September 15, 1982, by the Khomeini government, a government he helped to bring to power. And what of the hostages? 22 of them are still working for the State Department. 12 are still in the military. 5 are college students, and 5 are retired. 2 have left the military, 1 resigned from the Foreign Service, 2 hold government jobs, and 2 are civilians. 1 former hostage, Alan Golachinsky, has asked the State Department not to release any information about him. For him, 444 days of uninterrupted media attention was enough.
Ted, thank you. Excellent. Well done. 2 of the hostages, 2 or 3, I think, were at the inaugural ceremonies today. The lunch, inaugural lunch at the Capitol, is coming to an end, and when it's over, there will be toasts, which we will go in and hear. In the meantime, we'll be right back after these messages and a word from your local stations.
ABC News continuing coverage of Inauguration 85. From ABC News headquarters in Washington, Peter Jennings and David Brinkley.
So it shouldn't be a total loss. They're ice skating on the pooled pond at the foot of the hill on the west side of the U.S. Capitol, about where the inaugural would have been held had they been able to do it outdoors. Inside the Capitol, as again the lunch is still in progress, up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, there are 25,000 seats erected for today's parade, which will not occur, did not occur. Now they're empty. There are also 120 portable restrooms, also empty. Inside, they will have toasts at the end of the lunch. We will go inside and hear them.
Not, by the way, a total loss, David, for all of the people who came here hoping to participate in this inauguration, because later this afternoon at something called the Capitol Center, which among other things is the home of the Washington hockey and basketball teams, there is going to be some kind of a celebration. at which the President and Mrs. Reagan will be in attendance. And so some people today will have an opportunity to be knit together in somewhat more direct way than television.
All of those, not including the horses, who would have been in the parade, will be in the Capitol Center. I don't know what they're going to do. We'll see. I guess they'll play a little music, and they've got a band, a 400, if I've got this right, 450-piece band, is that right?
That is, in a sense, the last act that was going to be outside the reviewing stand at the White House when this enormous band, represented from various people around the country, were going to stand and play for the President, are now going to deafen him inside Capitol Stadium. Charlie Gibson is up there in either the Rotunda or Statuary Hall. I suspect at the moment he may be in the Rotunda, if you let me have a look at him. Charlie, how close are we now? Yes, you're in the Rotunda. How close are we now to the official toast, which will end this Democratic luncheon?
I don't know.
Thanks a lot.
I don't. The luncheon was supposed to be over by now, and you can't make things run on time. You can't make things run on time, and I understand the toasts are just about to start any moment. But they're just, about 75 feet away from us, so you'll know when we do.
Well, let me ask you this, Charlie. We've been observing that it looked very intimate up there today. Did people get any particular special feeling from this second inauguration?
Well, I think everybody was just delighted to be warm. I mean, that sounds a little silly, but that's the case. They called this thing off outside, not because they were concerned about the president's comfort. They had heaters and a little glass booth and everything, so he would have been fine. The president, they say, at 7 o'clock last night, when Senator Mathias, who was head of the inaugural committee, went to the White House to talk about whether they would do this thing outside or not, the president was worried about the people who were going to be working all night long, dusting the final bits of snow off the chairs and making the final preparations, etc. And he was worried about the fact they'd be working in temperatures of about 5 degrees below zero and wind chill of about 25 below. And that was the reason they called it off, and also the safety of the people that will be in the parade. You mentioned the fact that they're all going out to the Capitol Center. That place only seats about 18,000 people, and you've got 12,000 participants in the parade, all of whom, I'm told, are going to be out there. So there's very limited space for people out there other than the high school bands and the horse riders and the various groups that will be parading for the president.
Charles, you cover politics up there for us on a regular basis. George Will was referring to inside the Beltway. Some people inside the Beltway are saying this is going to turn sour for President Reagan in the next 4 years. What's your feeling about the politics up there?
Well, I think it is very early, and this was more, it sounded a bit like a State of the Union speech, but it was, I suppose you'd defend it as more thematic than programmatic, and the programmatic speech comes when we hear the State of the Union. The themes that were enunciated in this speech, though, basically, were tax simplification. Apparently the president is going to make a push on that. And then also the question of the deficits, and the deficits are the critical question. If Congress and the president are willing to work together on deficits, then there's a chance that much of what he said in the speech can happen. And now I see the picture in Statuary Hall, and I gather the toasts are about to begin.
They'll put a little lectern up behind Senator Mathias. He will, being the host, will make the first toast. President Reagan, I assume, will respond.
And David, lest I be accused of that Washington parochialism that sometimes people outside this capital refer to, inside the Beltway essentially means in the District of Washington and its immediate surroundings, the atomic mentality, as some people call it, in reference to the river.
It's a kind of insular, closed-in feeling that Washington has. It believes itself to be the center of the world. A bureaucrat in Washington, when he goes out into one of the states, calls it a field trip. Gives you an idea of what it's like here. That's what inside the Beltway means. It's a state of mind.
Mr. President.
Senator Mathias, host of the luncheon, now beginning the toasts.
Mr. President, whatever the elements, whatever the circumstances, you are the star of the show. Now, of course, you have a beautiful leading lady. You have a super co-star. But as I think you are well aware, you have a great supporting cast. Literally hundreds of people who have helped with this production. as stagehands, as carpenters, as spear carriers, in dozens of other ways. So on behalf of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, I want to thank each and every one of them. But every show, as you know, Mr. President, needs an impresario to generate ideas and to find the resources and to meet the deadlines. And my wife, Ann, has done all of this. I gratefully make a confession that she is the de facto chairman of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Activities, and that she is responsible for this luncheon and for its theme. But by assembling here from every corner of the country, we are the symbols of a more perfect union. We celebrate the constitutional goals of justice and tranquility and liberty guaranteed by law. But law itself was not the end. It was the means by which Americans could attain a unique quality of life. John Adams said it very succinctly. He said, "I must study politics and war, that my sons may study mathematics and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting and poetry and architecture and statuary and tapestry and porcelain." We today are the heirs of that vision. We are the posterity who are secure in the blessings of liberty. And we are the children's children who enjoy the quality of life that John Adams anticipated. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, to mark this day of celebration, of achievement, and I think of thankfulness, it is my honor to present a crystal bowl to each of you on behalf of the Congress and of the American people. Mr. President, the base of your bowl is engraved with the noble purposes of the Constitution, of which you are the sworn protector. Mr. Vice President, your bowl, the base of your bowl is engraved with the words of Thomas Jefferson's Psalm of Liberty that we heard sung so beautifully in the ceremony today. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you all to rise and join me in a toast to the President of the United States.
I'm not trying to play Dean Martin. Senator Mathias, honorable members of the House and distinguished guests, and the members of the Senate, of course, this has been an historic day, and it's not over yet. And together we mark the end of one term and the beginning of another. And I want each of you to know how grateful I am for all that you've done, all the energy and personal commitment that you have mustered in these last 4 years to make our system work. in the shifting alliances of a free government, we in this room have been intense allies and on some issues, but while disagreeing on others. But I think the level of respect and courtesy with which we've treated each other speaks well for us and confirms the viability of this great democratic system which is now in our care. There's been quite a few inaugurations in my lifetime. I missed Abe Lincoln's, but I do remember Calvin Coolidge's. Even though I was of the other party at the time, he was much loved and respected. I was a Democrat in those days. His inaugural address said, "Our Congress represents the people and the states. In all legislative affairs, they are the natural collaborator with the President. In spite of all the criticism which often falls to its lot, I do not hesitate to say that there is no more independent and effective legislative body in the world. It is and should be jealous of its prerogatives. I welcome the cooperation and expect to share with it not only the responsibility but the credit for our common effort to secure beneficial legislation." Calvin Coolidge. Well, I hope we can work together in that same spirit. I have a plaque on my desk in the office that says what I firmly believe, and that is there is no limit to what a man can accomplish if he doesn't, or what he can do and where he can go, if he doesn't care who gets the credit. So I hope in the days and the years to come that we can move ahead, meet the challenges of our day, thinking only of how much we can accomplish if we maintain our goodwill and cooperation. We're very grateful to you for these gifts, and may I offer a toast to all of you here, the members of the Congress, all the guests who are here with you, and to the best Vice President this country has ever had, George Bush, into the next 4 years.
That's the end of the lunch, end of the swearing-in ceremony at the Capitol. The President now will ride back down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House, where he will stay a while until other events begin to happen.
He's obviously been very clearly moved by it today, David. Before taking the oath, he looked occasionally up into the dome of the rotunda. And Larry Speaks, who's the spokesman at the White House, was asked why he did it. And the president simply replied, "I just had a great sense of history sitting here." And of course, he's our oldest president. He's lived for more than almost a third of the life of this republic. We'll be right back after this.
This ABC News live coverage of Inauguration 85 has been brought to you by General Motors. Extra time, extra effort, and attention to every detail. GM is committed to excellence. And MasterCard International. So worldly, so welcome.
You got a final thought, David, as we go away from here at about 5 minutes to 2 and wait to see what the inaugural committee has been able to organize next?
Well, they're hastily trying to throw together some kind of ceremony at the Capitol Center, which is a basketball arena.
And a hockey arena.
And hockey. Just outside the Beltway, about this far. So, what we've seen today is what 54 million votes can do for you, which is what Mr. Reagan got. We have also seen the weather cancel a parade, which robbed them all of a chance to see the new Pennsylvania Avenue, which Washington is very proud of. It's been cleaned up, trees planted, a lot of junky buildings removed, and there's only one porno store left on Pennsylvania, and it's leaving in March.
It was John F. Kennedy's inauguration, wasn't it, when people began to focus on what sort of state Pennsylvania Avenue, sometimes called America's Main Street, was in?
It was he who started it. He set up a commission to study it, see what could be done about it, and it's coming along nicely now. Most of the really trashy stuff along the avenue is gone. Soon it'll all be gone. Anyway, I gather they're going to be in the Capitol Arena, what time, at 3 o'clock?
3 o'clock Eastern Time, and here is a brief glimpse of that enormous band, 400 strong. Will remind people, I think, of the Olympics band. We will be coming back at 3 o'clock Eastern Time to hear, and I don't think we'll be able to miss the events that go on there. What have we seen this morning? The second inauguration, and a fair amount of speculation on what a second term is all about, but bearing in mind that only President Eisenhower since the 1950s has concluded a second term. So perhaps what you've already picked up on is that much of what you've heard today is speculation. It's been a very truncated inaugural, but we hope you've enjoyed being with us for this continuation and this American celebration. We'll see you at 3 o'clock. For David Brinkley, I'm Peter Jennings in Washington. Thank you for joining us. See you later.
ABC News coverage of Inauguration 85 has been a presentation of ABC News. This is an ABC News special report with continuing coverage of Inauguration 85. Reporting from ABC News headquarters in Washington, David Brinkley and Peter Jennings.
The Capitol, the Great Dome, and in there today the rotunda under which President Reagan has already taken his public oath of office as the 40th President of the United States. And now the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland. Not very far from here, President Reagan has got on a helicopter with Mrs. Reagan and has flown out to the Capitol Center at Landover to have a substitute celebration. It is still very, very cold in Washington this afternoon, including the wind chill 13 degrees below zero. And this celebration inside the Capitol Center is going to substitute for what was at one point one of the great parades.
Well, all these kids with trombones who were going to march up Pennsylvania Avenue and looked so great couldn't do it, so they're going to have them all inside in this barn-like arena in the suburbs, which normally is filled with basketball, hockey, ice shows, and rock stars. Today they've got the military bands, about 12,000 or 14,000, I think, people in there. You can't see them all because it's dark. Ruffles and flourishes. President is arriving.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Mrs. Reagan.
Enthusiastic welcome, obviously, for the President and Mrs. Reagan. There were going to be almost 12,000 participants in the parade today. This stadium seats between 16 and 18,000 with this center. And a great many of them, many of the young people who had come to participate in the inauguration today have gone out there to greet the President. And behind him, as you can see, the Vice President and Mrs. Bush this afternoon. The inaugural committee moved very diligently after working for almost a year on getting the inauguration ready. They've thrown this together in 24 hours. It's exhausted some people.
They were up all night messing around with this.
They were indeed. And right after the swearing in, David, Mike Deaver, who's the Deputy White House Chief of Staff and who's had a very bad case of flu, checked himself into Georgetown Hospital. So he's going to miss this afternoon and watch it with everybody else on television.
Mr. Reagan will have a few words to say here during this gathering, intimate little gathering in the Capitol Center.
Really, it's the celebratory portion of today, celebration time to sit back and really enjoy the music. There were going to be 57 bands originally. What you're going to hear first, probably, is the All-American Marching Band, 600 strong.
Peter, the trouble with a band like that is it's so big. If you're playing in the back row, you can't hear what they're playing up front.
Just before the brass starts, 600 students from 27 states. They've been practicing for less than 3 weeks, and they were supposed to have performed last night at the Jefferson Memorial, along with a 3,500-member choir at a youth gala, which was also canceled because of the weather.
Directed by Dr. Arthur C. Partner.
in the hall. Before they start blowing a trumpet, Sam, when we won't be able to hear you, where are you and what do you see there?
Well, David, I'm up here in the bleachers along with many of the people who are going to march in the parade. As you observe, the people who are filling the hall of this great sports arena where the Washington Bullets or the Capitals, the sports teams from the Capitol play, are people who are going to march in the parade. But now they are invited guests to watch this demonstration that you see now by the All-American Marching Band. I got to tell you that the American flag, which is the replica furled on stage behind the president and the vice president, was to be on the last float of the parade. It was to be the finale float. Well, necessity is the mother of invention, and so they have simply lifted the top of the float off and put it as a backdrop for the stage here, and I must say it's quite colorful.
Reagan in that blue dress looks like a part of the flag.
What may be the first standstill inaugural parade, Yankee Doodle Dandy for the President and Mrs. Reagan. We'll be back in just a minute with more music.
ABC News coverage of Inauguration 85 continues.
In case you've just joined us, this is the Capitol Center in Maryland, just outside Washington. This is the All-American Marching Band in a salute to President Reagan's inauguration.
Playing Hold Up Tiger. $600 and what? 45?
645, 600 students.
6 New York Philharmonics. Size, anyway.
This is a medley that they simply call the Music of America. Between them, of course, the President Reagan's Secret Service agent chosen by Nancy and Mr. Reagan.
As soon as the music is over, a minute or so, I think, he will have a few words to say to this hall full of young people who came to Washington expecting to march down Pennsylvania Avenue, but being unable to do so because of the bitter cold and the fear of frostbite. 13 below now, is that what they say, with a wind chill factor?
Sam Donaldson goes where the president goes, and he's in the Capitol Center. Sam?
Huizinga, who is from Holland, Michigan, and near Grand Rapids. Heather Huizinga from Holland, Michigan, near Grand Rapids, and expected to march in the parade. Were you disappointed when it was canceled?
Yeah, very disappointed. It's sort of frustrating, although this is exciting.
This is exciting, but it doesn't take the place of marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, does it?
No, not quite.
On the other hand, it's a lot warmer than it would have been today.
Yeah.
When you heard how cold it was going to be, what did you think?
I thought we could still do it, although I guess it would have been too cold.
You are with how many members of your band?
About 147.
And where are you staying here in Washington, Heather?
We're staying in Maryland.
What do you think of being here with President Reagan and Vice President Bush so close?
It's exciting. It's very exciting. I never thought I'd see him. So
Thank you very much. Heather Huizinga of Holland, Michigan. Gentlemen?
Thank you, Sam.
145, she said. I'm looking down the list. There's some huge high school bands from towns not much bigger than the band. There's one in which 20% of the entire population of the town is in the band.
Well, David, you know, we tend rather glibly to use the phrase uniquely American, but as we have a look at how cold it is outside, away from that brass sound, I must tell you, after 20 years of travel overseas, there is nothing like an American college brass band.
Their loss.
We will hear them again before the afternoon is over. There's 16 to 18,000 people who are undoubtedly among the favored to be there today. They're among the 140,000 who'd expected to be at the outdoor ceremony. Now, being introduced is Ronald Walker, who's the chairman of the inaugural committee.
Ronald Walker.
Thank you. Oh, my goodness. What a wonderful parade it would have been, wouldn't it? We made the right decision. Thank you for your support, your understanding, and God bless all of you. On behalf of the General Chairman, Mike Deaver, the 50th American Inaugural Committee, we thank you. I now have one of the distinct honors of my life, and I would like to introduce to you the First Lady of the United States of America.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to tell you how disappointed we were, and I know how disappointed you were, and thousands of people who were hoping and waiting to see you in the parade. And hearing you here, as Ron said, how wonderful it would have been. I know how hard you worked and how long you worked, and I wish it could have been different, but you wouldn't have liked frostbite. So thank you very much for letting us come out here and hear you and see you and tell you in person how sorry we are. And I do thank all of you for all your work and everything that you've done. You've just been wonderful, and you are wonderful, and we love you.
walking.
You scared me.
I forgot something.
You're supposed to introduce the president.
I suspect.
I was supposed to introduce my roommate.
I think that'll do to all those people, David, who say that Mrs. Reagan's running the government. Forgotten them there.
Who happens to be my husband, who happens to be the President of the United States.
How could you have forgotten me? Well, good afternoon. I'm told that this is the coldest day in inauguration history. But looking out at all of you, I somehow feel there's a lot of warmth inside this building. It was... Who would ever thought that I'd be the one standing up and talking while all of you were, well, almost all of you were sitting down and listening? It just goes to show here in Washington things have a way of turning out the opposite of how we intend. I know you didn't get your chance to salute all of us, but I just want you to know how happy and how important it was for Nancy, myself, and the Vice President and Mrs. Bush to come here to salute all of you. You know, whether we and all America were so looking forward to seeing each one of you perform and delight us with your wonderful talents and exuberance, and what a great American family you are. Because whether you come from as far away as Hawaii, California, Texas, Florida, New York or Mississippi or Washington or Alaska. Where I'm told the team from Alaska was the only one that came here and really was and could have gone through with the parade, because they came with a team of Huskies, and I can't go on naming all your states, because I know all 50 are represented here, and the territories, and you represent America at its best, and you would have given America the greatest show on earth. Now, we were all anticipating the parade, and I was looking forward to every unit. I'd heard about all of you, and particularly there was one that's someplace in here, I think, is a band from my home, or the town where I was born, Tampico, Illinois. And with that band was going to be the pom-pom girls from the high school, Dixon, Illinois, where I graduated. I want to tell you, I have a little knowledge and understanding of some of your problems. I was the drum major of the Dixon YMCA Boys Band, and we were... I had a brief career because we were asked to head up the parade in a nearby town on Decoration Day. And I know that everyone was briefed about the parade course and everything, but I had also been told that a fellow on a white horse was going to be out in front, and I figured I'll just follow the man on the white horse. Who can go wrong doing that? And I was going down the street making with the baton, and pretty soon I thought the music was beginning to sound a little faint. I looked over my shoulder. Everybody turned a corner. I was going down the wrong street all by myself. I kept right on walking, right out of a musical career. Well, we know the tremendous time and personal dedication that each of you put into your preparations. Everything from bake sales to getting church and civic groups to help you raise the money to pay your way, to the long, long hours of rehearsal so that you perform at your very best. And I don't want to forget to mention one other very important group of participants who are here with us too, our United States military personnel. You know, all of them and most of you are about pretty much the same age group. And I just want to say something. Back in World War II, General George Marshall was asked by someone what he thought was our secret weapon. And General Marshall said, the best damn kids in the world. And you know something? If he were here today, he could say the same thing, because you are. Led by our military, led by Paul Miller, the Director of Ceremonies and Special Events for the Military District of Washington, Deputy Parade Chairman, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Frank Turner. They were a tremendously effective organizational team, and they would have been there to line your parade route down Pennsylvania Avenue. And let me tell you, I and all of us up here, George and Barbara and Nancy, we were raring to go. I went searching into the closet. I had a pair of long johns. I was going to put them on. Last time I wore them was in the 1980 primary campaign in New Hampshire. But it would have been a magical moment to tuck away and cherish with your loved ones during all your later years. But it was not to be. And I just hope you understand that we only made this decision after we were convinced that it was absolutely necessary to protect your own health as well as the health of the thousands who would be lining the parade to watch you. Believe me, we had professional medical advice in making that decision. But I pledge one thing to all of you today, and that is to serve with the very best of my abilities and to try during these next 4 years to live up to the spirit, unity, and pride that you have brought to Washington, because that's what makes America the greatest country on earth. There's another thought that I'd like to leave with you, and that is that your trip here, despite the cancellation of the parade, is still very worthwhile and important. Because all of us together have been participants in a great miracle of modern history, the simple, peaceful continuation of power, ratifying the sovereignty of we the people. There has never been a transfer of power by bayonet in America, and God willing, there never will be. Thomas Jefferson once said, "How little do my countrymen know what precious blessings they are in possession of, and which no other people on earth enjoy." Well, today we can rejoice that more and more people on earth are moving toward democracy, and we can rejoice that America, a nation still young compared to so many others, is the oldest, most successful republic on earth. In 2 years, we will celebrate together the 200th anniversary of our Constitution. And what a day that will be for parades, not only in Washington, D.C., but all across our land. So, while we could not go through with today's festivities, we can celebrate in our hearts the continuation of this wonderful experiment in individual liberty and self-government. And we can give thanks that we remain today, as Abraham Lincoln said over 100 years ago, the last best hope of man on earth. God bless you all. Thank you all again. Have a safe journey home. Thank you.
They had an elaborate setup this morning to take all these young musicians and others from their hotels and
Mr.
here and there.
President and Mr. Vice President, we now present the grand finale to your inaugural parade. This is the one we had hoped to do for you on Pennsylvania Avenue. Only now, you're riding on our finale float.
Parade, of course, having been canceled because of the cold weather that we're having here in Washington. The President quoted George Marshall and said one of the great strengths of this country was the best damn kids in the world. It's been a great
that huge flag behind the President, Mrs. Reagan, actually is afloat. It was to have been hauled down Pennsylvania Avenue today. Since they couldn't do that, they brought it in here.
Something we saw a great deal of during the presidential election campaign. The oldest president of the United States and much celebrated by youth.
Mr. President,
we saw it, as I said,
Vice
throughout the
President,
campaign, and once again we see it
ladies
today
and
with
gentlemen,
many young Americans saying how strongly they identify with the president as a father figure and an authority
marching band in the singing of our national anthem.
national anthem, played by the biggest band I've ever seen or heard. I might say this is quite a little production to have been put together beginning sometime in the middle of the night.
It's quite true. We didn't get our cameras, any indication we might even get our cameras and microphones in there until the middle of the night, literally.
Well, we didn't really get them in until a few hours ago. And if the lighting and so on inside the hall has been less than spectacular, remember the inaugural committee had no idea of doing this until they canceled the parade frantically in the middle of the night. 2, 3 a.m. They were out here after last night's hockey game. They were in this hall trying to figure out what to do today and how to do it. So it was, considering all of that, very well done.
And there's more to come, and we will stay with it for the remainder of this half hour. 76 trombones.
Broadway, the music man, right? Yes.
We'll be back in just a minute.
It's amazing how you feel each and every time you taste Yoplait, the yogurt of France.
Falling in love again, oh yes, it's true.
You can't resist Yoplait's creamy smoothness.
What am I to do?
The real fruit mixed all through. The taste is truly extraordinary.
I can't help it.
Get a little taste of Yoplait, the yogurt of France.
Falling in love again.
What legs? What gorgeous legs. I love legs. Next month, you're going to make some succulent chicken cacciatore with red sauce smothered in onions. So now, my little chickadees, I'm going to protect you in thick, tough Ziploc freezer bags. Ziploc bags are a zip to lock, and they stay locked, so your legs won't suffer freezer burn. Arrivederci, my lovelies, till we eat again.
Ziploc. We've got the lock on food protection.
MasterCard, fill my flat.
MasterCard International. So worldly, so welcome.
Your taste is impeccable.
MasterCard.
Home is where the card is.
International.
There are 15 premature labor centers in Illinois. The problem can be getting there in time. But in Illinois, a special helicopter's helping. It's made with Kevlar, a super strong, super light DuPont product, which helps make it light enough to carry doctors, nurses, even an incubator, just in case time runs out. For aeronautics, DuPont Kevlar's a major advance. But for certain mothers, it's a major miracle. DuPont, better things for better living.
ABC News coverage of Inauguration 85 continues.
At the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland, just outside Washington, a salute to the President, the All-American College Band, the Stars and Stripes Forever.
Forever by the All-American College Marching
Ladies
Band.
and gentlemen, one final reminder. Washington has warm weather, too, and the cherry blossoms are gorgeous in the springtime, so pay us a visit very soon. Good news, too.
Little commercial for Washington in the spring, which seems a very long way off at this time. But as the president said, it seems extremely warm in sentimentality as well as temperature in that stadium. Sam, are you still there?
I am, Peter. This wasn't a parade, but it was colorful and it was certainly noisy, and that's over half of what you want from a parade. I was struck in this ceremony, in this little observance, by the fact that the patriotic fervor with which Mr. Reagan campaigned last fall so successfully, he carries forward, and certainly this inaugural is surrounded by the trappings of the flag and the patriotism and songs such as God Bless the USA. I think it's entirely appropriate here on inaugural day, but it does remind us once again of how Mr. Reagan is able to so successfully wrap the country around him. He is Uncle Sam, and he becomes then the personification of all that is good about America. He makes us feel good about ourselves, and at the same time, he of course makes us feel good about his program. There he is getting into his helicopter for the fairly short ride back to the White House South Lawn. He and Mrs. Reagan came, and they're going to depart by helicopter. Once again, he is the United States. The great seal of the presidency of the United States is on that helicopter, and he has projected that so successfully again today.
Well, Sam, as you point out, he dominates the political scene in the country like no other president really or like few modern presidents have. Our polls, certainly all in the last few days, which we've taken, and perhaps not uncharacteristic at a time when a country has just voted him back into office, but 69% of those people we asked across the country think the president is doing a first-class job of the presidency. This day, of course, is not over for him and Mrs. Reagan. Seems to me they add more inaugural gala balls with every inauguration. There are 9 throughout the District of Columbia tonight, and the president and Mrs. Reagan are going to try to attend, if not all, most of them. They say they're going to try and make all of them.
The helicopter's in the parking lot of the Capitol Center, which lies beside the no doubt famous Beltway. And it'll take him back to the White House in probably about 5 minutes. I say no president ever has to sit in a traffic jam or wait for a red light.
Well, I get the feeling, David, that it's sort of been one of those all is not lost days by any means. To give you an example, there were 1,000 box lunches made up from the D.C. police officers, and they are all going to be donated to the shelters for the homeless. President and Mrs. Reagan lifting off to go back to the White House, to the South Lawn, and prepare for tonight's inaugural galas. We will be right back after these messages and a word from your local station.
The 50th inaugural, we're back. It's coming down toward the end now, except for the 9 inaugural balls to be held tonight. It has cost a great deal. The last we heard, this may have changed. The last we heard, they expected to pay it all or even to show a profit from the sale of tickets and so on, and from donations here and there, including, for example, 47 white Chrysler automobiles, which they said are exactly like those advertised by Ricardo Montalban on television. After the inaugural, they will be sold, and they expect to sell them for a little higher price because they can say, sir, this convertible was used in the presidential inaugural parade. Well, no, it wasn't, but they could say it anyway.
You were a bottomless font, David, of information. They're not going to make a lot of money because one of the things they made very clear today is that people who did not get a chance to go to the inauguration are going to get some of their money back. We asked Sheila Cass to put together a piece as to how much this is really going to cost when it's all over.
Was to be the best organized Inauguration Day in history, with the tightest security and the snappiest of precision parades. 2,259 military personnel practicing to march in drill units and bands, along with 9,287 civilians and 21 dogs. Everything was built, and the inaugural committee thought everything was paid for. But then Arctic air, known as the Alberta Clipper, blew all the plans upside down. It threatens to plunge this inaugural committee of Republican businessmen so so proud of being in the black, into the red.
This is a costly development. We will deal with it the best we can. We hope that we've raised sufficient funds to cover all of our costs and not be in the red, but it's not possible to know.
They don't save any money by not holding the parade. It's all spent already. $1 million for the presidential reviewing stand, $239,000 in taxpayers' money for the outdoor platform where the president was to take the oath, and an untold amount of money to plan very strict security. But now the committee is offering to refund money to anyone who bought a ticket to the parade. They sold 25,000 tickets at $12.50, $75, or $100. If all those purchasers want their money back, it will cost $844,000. In addition to its losses in ticket sales, the committee doesn't know how much it will cost to stage a hastily planned replacement event at an indoor arena in the Washington suburbs. Still, this committee has shown itself skillful in raising money. If today's events push its accounts into the red, it will have to ask its often willing donors to dig a little deeper. Gentlemen?
Sheila, thank you. Now we're going to George Will and to Sandy Van Oker. It's coming to an end. What are your thoughts as we wind this up? George?
Well, David, the world is divided by no means evenly between those who can and those who cannot get enough of bands and John Philip Sousa. I'm in the latter group, and this is a good day for those of us who like bands. Watching those faces out there, the absolute enjoyment of those young people, I'm reminded of the difference between the way Americans talk and the way they actually think about their government. Americans feel it's a sort of duty to say they don't like Washington and they don't like the federal government, but they certainly seize every opportunity to come here on pilgrimages, and I think that's exactly the word. What we've seen today is a kind of secular religion. It's a civic liturgy where we, as a great, vast country with very different origins and very different interests and regional differences, come together and celebrate shared values. You'll see it in the spring as the high schools come for their senior class trips and the buses snake their way down Pennsylvania Avenue looking like a giant, wonderful metal coral snake. Americans talk a tough game against Washington, but when they get here, they enjoy it.
Sandy?
I think that, not to end on too unenthusiastic a note, I agree with everything that George said. I think that there's a certain poignancy about today for Ronald Reagan and Mrs. Reagan, because I think never will their popularity, never will his power be greater than it is today. And I don't predict that in the second term things are going to get very bad for him, but things are going to be different in the second term. He will have to take responsibility, which most of the time I think he escaped in the first term. In the phrase of a premier of France, Mondes France, to govern is to choose, Ronald Reagan's going to have to make some very hard choices on the economy, on arms negotiations, and it may be that we'll all take pleasure in remembering this day as the day that Ronald Reagan stood supreme before the natural effects of political decay, I think, are going to start, and almost when the Congress meets with him next month in the State of the Union. Gentlemen?
Sandy, George, thank you very much. We'll be back in just a minute.
A glimpse of the American presidency from General Motors. Abraham Lincoln's dream was to save the Union. Wilson's was to bring America into the League of Nations. Roosevelt's dream was to get us out of a Great Depression. Like other dreams, presidential dreams don't always come true, but speaking the dream is one of the most important jobs a president has.
Ask what you can do for your country.
Precise measurements, perfect fits, flawless surfaces. General Motors employees are committed to giving you nothing less. And when the shift ends, their drive for quality continues. Because GM people sign up to take one of the cars home to evaluate. This kind of extra involvement helps build better cars.
Nobody sweats the details like GM.
President's helicopter has arrived back at the White House safely, soundly, and he'll be back inside in the warmth shortly. It's been interesting to see the military services help to organize all of the parade, which was not held. Then they helped to organize the substitute for the parade. They were to have, I believe, 7 bands of their own in the parade, plus marching units. So I think, at least in terms of numbers, it adds up to the biggest military operation since the invasion of Grenada. Peter?
I can't comment on that, but your figures are usually absolutely perfect. I think the most interesting thing is that I find about listening to the president today, and Sam has touched on it, George Will has touched on it, this evocation that the president creates of the country and Washington separately. He campaigned against Washington 4 years ago. 4 years later, he was going into a second term, still campaigning to some extent against Washington when he is Washington. Don't you find that a neat trick, if nothing else?
I think the city of Washington is a new convention center, which is very large, very elaborate, very lavish, and they wanted to have one or both of the political conventions here. The Republican, Democratic went to San Francisco and Dallas instead, because they didn't want to associate themselves too closely with Washington. The thinking was, if we have our convention in Washington, they might blame us for it. Well, everybody hates the U.S. government, or says he does. Washington, on the other hand, is a beautiful city which has many attractive features which people like to see, and Reagan is able to appeal to a basic love of our country that lies in almost all of us, regardless of how critical we may be. He is a genius at it. We saw it today in his inaugural speech and in his talk to those kids in the convention center.
There are also some other, I think, differences between now and 4 years ago. 4 years ago, he did not mention the Soviet Union by name, if recollection serves me correctly, in his inaugural speech. Today he does. Clearly makes that clear, as he did even before today's speech, that this was the principal element of foreign policy. But there have been some things that we haven't paid much attention to. There was a counter-inaugural demonstration here the other day led by Jesse Jackson, which did not attract very many people. And in all of the polls recently, which have showed the president to be standing so high on domestic and foreign policy, there is still this element that he cannot do much about poverty. There is a consciousness in the country that there is a growing disparity between rich and poor. One of the challenges I think the president will have in the next 4 years is to overcome this image, which I think still clings to him, that he is the president of the better off, not the lesser off.
Probably he'll never overcome it, though he will continue to deny it. Today, for example, or yesterday, I guess it was, one of the Republicans who came here, the grown-up, not to blow a trombone, just to come. He said it was a pleasure to be here at a time when the politicians were, number one, not trying to get his vote and not trying to get his money. As he said, this is the least cynical day in Washington's year. He's probably right.
Quite indeed. We will have more coverage of the Inauguration Day on World News Tonight, and there will be continuing coverage of the inauguration celebrations on Nightline tonight, including coverage of some of the inaugural gala balls. We thank you for joining us. For David Brinkley, I'm Peter Jennings. We'll see you later. Have a nice afternoon.
Inauguration 85 came to you from ABC News in Washington. This has been a presentation of ABC News.